Chapter 1. The Arseni family's main house is controlled by the infamous Russian gang leader, Vasily Arseni. He is feared. Not only is he the most influential family leader in Russia, but he also owns black market and gray industries worldwide. The Arseni family's power stretches far beyond imagination, and its reach is unmatched. He is a beast in the dark world, the king of the gang world. However, no one expected him to marry a seemingly ordinary Thai girl. Nathalata, a famous Thai actress, had flown to Russia for the launch of a well-known jewelry brand. The girl, with her calm demeanor and plain features, was arrogant and difficult to approach. But her beauty was enough to capture everyone's attention, and it attracted the young gang leader at the time. After many twists and turns, they finally married and had 2 children as a testament to their love. 2 years after their eldest son, Thirikit Kian Arseni, came their second son, Kristanai Rome Arseni. Under strict training, they were expected to grow into powerful gang members, but at the same time, they were surrounded by their parents' love. The brothers shared a deep bond and trusted each other more than anyone. To outsiders, it was a perfect family. Only family members knew the unusualness of the 2 sons. Rome, why are you injured again? 17-year-old Kian frowned at his brother. Rome's mouth was cracked. A long wound ran from the corner of his eye, his clothes were messy, and his light-colored hair disheveled. But his gray eyes shone with excitement, and the corners of his mouth lifted like a child who'd just had a lot of fun. Don't worry, Kian. If I'm injured, the other guy is in much worse shape. Rome smiled even brighter, ignoring the wound at the corner of his mouth. But you could have avoided getting hurt, couldn't you? Kian frowned, not because his brother had fought, but because he'd let himself get injured. It's no fun without some blood. But Mom will be sad. Rome's smile vanished instantly at his brother's words. He'd been having so much fun that he'd completely forgotten how much the only woman in the family worried. In this family, they feared not their powerful gangster father, but their mother. As soon as she showed even a hint of sadness, they surrendered. The last time Rome came home with serious injuries, his mother had cried in fear. One tear had made him feel guilty for nearly a year. He sighed softly and began thinking of ways to hide his wound. But before he could do anything, the door opened. He nearly sighed in relief, while his brother gave him a mocking look. The eldest son's abnormality was his social disorder. Kian hated to socialize. Apart from his family, he never allowed anyone to call him by his middle name, as if shutting out the whole world. He knew his brother had his own issues. Although he'd taught those people a lesson, Kian still didn't open his world to anyone. The second son, Rome, had an abnormality of his own, impatience and cruelty, as if he'd completely inherited his father's genes. Especially when it came to his family, his anger was even more terrifying. Yet because he always wore a smile, most people never noticed. Rome sighed quietly, bracing himself to face his mother, and followed his brother to the luxurious black car parked at the door. A moment later, a tall woman stepped out, her face cold and her demeanor elegant. But the instant she saw her son, her calm shattered like breaking ice. "No, Rome, are you hurt? What happened?" "It's just a small accident, don't worry, Mom." Rome replied quietly, lowering his head and hugging his mother to evade the question. "How was your trip to Thailand, Mom? Did you have fun? I missed you so much." "Don't change the subject." Nathalata frowned, but she still hugged her son back tenderly and stroked his head. "Mom knows boys can be impulsive sometimes, but at least don't let yourself get hurt, okay?" "I'm sorry, Mom." Rome could only apologize in a low voice. Seeing his brother's mocking expression, he could only grit his teeth and silently signal with his eyes for help, hoping to keep their mother from crying. "Reward?" Kian raised an eyebrow, asking instead of offering sympathy. "The latest Nike shoes." Rome responded helplessly. They had just discussed the latest shoe releases the night before, and even though Kian wanted them, he nodded in agreement. "Mom, you just got back. You should rest first." Kian smiled slightly and walked over, smoothly changing the subject. "Is there any luggage I can help with?" "No." "Kian, let the bodyguards handle it." Nathalata turned to her eldest son, then suddenly remembered something. "Oh, I almost forgot to introduce him. Mhok, come here." The 2 brothers froze when they heard the unfamiliar name. Nathalata turned and waved toward the car, signaling someone to step out. They narrowed their eyes and watched silently as the car door opened and a thin figure emerged. The newcomer was an Asian boy with black hair and black eyes. He was thin and small, looking even smaller in a loose black long-sleeved t-shirt and trousers. But what caught everyone's attention was his expressionless face, like a lifeless statue. This is Mhok. He will be Kian and Rome's new brother. Nathalada walked over and gently put her arm around the boy's shoulders, smiling. Mhok is the same age as Rome. You should get along well. Kian, you should take good care of him. Kian immediately frowned, clearly unhappy, while Rome's eyes widened in surprise. He's so young, the same age as me, and we're supposed to be friends. Rome muttered to himself. Mom, where did he come from? Kian asked in a low voice, a hint of vigilance in his tone. He always kept his distance from outsiders, even a little possessive, like a beast guarding its territory. Mhok was brought back from Thailand by my mom. He's a very smart and cute child, so I invited him to live with us. Nathalada smiled warmly. She understood her son's nature. Some wounds only heal with time. As a mother, she could only wait patiently and not force him. Does Dad know about this? It was Dad who suggested it. Nathalada smiled softly, entrusting the new boy to the two brothers. You two get along well. Mom is going to find Dad. She hasn't seen him for several days and misses him. They each hugged their mother, and then Nathalada walked into the house, leaving the three boys staring at each other. Kian took the lead, his face as cold as a refrigerator, his eyes full of hostility. So different from the gentle brother, he was with family. Kian always treated outsiders like this, as if he wanted to isolate himself from everything. Go get some rest. Report to Dad tomorrow. Kian said coldly, glancing at the bodyguards behind him. Find him a room. The bodyguard in black nodded. Kian turned and left, ignoring him completely. Rome glanced at the new boy secretly, raised an eyebrow, and seeing the same expressionless face, turned and followed his brother back inside, no longer paying attention to the child. He was just a new servant from Asia, not a family member he needed to care about. Mhok followed a man in black into the manor. Apparently, the housekeeper had been informed of his arrival, so a room was quickly prepared. The family members' rooms were on the third floor of the manor, while the other servants lived on the first. The man in black led him through the manor and around to the back, down a long corridor with closed doors on both sides. They stopped in front of the third door on the left. The man turned to face him. This is your room, the man said in English, handing him a key. My name is Alof. I live next door. You can call me if you need anything. Mhok took the key silently, without responding. Alof opened his own door, and Mhok paused for a moment before opening his door and looking around. The room was better than he expected, like a standard one-bedroom apartment. The bed was large enough for two, with a wardrobe at its foot, and a work desk, a double sofa, and a small storage cabinet against the other wall. A door led to a narrow but clean bathroom. Mhok placed his bag beside the bed and, after carefully checking the room, lay down. The bed was clean and carried a faint sunshine smell of freshly washed sheets. It made him feel relaxed, and the tension knotted in his body seemed to ease a little. He never expected his life to change so dramatically, crossing national borders. The boy sighed and reached into his pocket, pulling out a balisong knife. The handle was pure black with a red flame pattern. The blade was sharp and reflected his empty black eyes. This was a gift from the man he called father when he was 10 years old. Not a toy or a fairy tale book, this sharp knife. He held the knife casually, his fingers moving nimbly around the blade, metallic light flickering in his hand. This was his world. Join the gang or be killed. His only thought was survival, running desperately forward, or else he'd be abandoned. But who could have imagined that one day he would have the chance to protect others? Mhok sighed, thinking of the two new hosts he'd just met. The brothers clearly didn't welcome him and seemed surprised. They obviously knew nothing about this, but their open hostility made him uneasy. It was difficult enough to protect someone. If he was rejected, he didn't know what he would do. Mhok put away the knife and closed his eyes, hiding his inner fatigue. When he opened them again, only calm remained. He got up, showered, and changed. After tidying up, he climbed into bed and slept soundly for the first time in months. What was meant to come would come. Chapter 2. Mhok woke early in the morning and did some simple exercises in his room. He didn't dare wander around. He waited until he had worked up a good sweat, then showered and changed. Not long after he finished, there was a knock at the door. He opened it to find Alof, the man who had brought him here yesterday, waiting outside. Come with me. The sir is waiting for you upstairs. Mhok was ready. He simply locked the door and followed the man in black. Alof led him up to the second floor. As they walked, Mhok quietly took in the house. The mansion centered on a vast circular living room with thick cushioned floors and a high ceiling covered with frosted glass to let in light. A spiral staircase wrapped around this central space. They reached the second floor, and Alof led him to the right. Soon, they arrived at a beautifully carved wooden door. After knocking and receiving permission, they entered. The man in black opened the door and stopped at the threshold, not stepping inside. Mhok lowered his head slightly and walked in. Alof then closed the door, leaving Mhok alone to slowly look around. The room was a little cold. One wall was filled by tall bookshelves and filing cabinets. In the middle sat a large desk piled with documents. On the other side was a luxurious leather sofa set, with a small coffee table in the center. Come in and sit down. A middle-aged man spoke in Russian. He sat on the sofa, slowly drinking hot coffee. He was tall and gave off a faint sense of oppression. His light gray eyes lifted slightly, then returned to the cup in his hand. Mhok followed his instructions and sat on the opposite sofa. Across from him sat the leader's two sons, their attitudes still cold. Mhok glanced at them quietly, then turned his gaze to the master of the house. Let me introduce them formally first. Vasily slowly turned his coffee cup and spoke in a relaxed tone. These are my sons. This is the eldest, Kian. That is the youngest, Rome. Call me the. Kian cut in immediately, glancing at Mhok coldly before looking away. Vasily chuckled and gestured toward Mhok. This is Mhok. From today on, he will be your right-hand man. I don't need an assistant, Kian replied icily, his hostility growing more obvious. You will need one someday. The middle-aged man shook his head, his tone still gentle. Try it first. If you truly don't like it, I will let him go. Kian pursed his lips and didn't argue, which counted as reluctant agreement. Vasily let out a long sigh and turned to his youngest son. Mhok and Rome are close in age. School starts next month. You can go together and take care of each other. Me? Rome drew out the word, sounding a little impatient. Yes, you're about the same age. Who else would take care of you? Vasily smiled, not budging. But I think he's better suited to take care of you. Mhok, please. Him? Take care of me? Huh. Rome turned his head with an irritable sigh, while his father smiled softly, as if he knew his son's character well. It's fitting to let him look after you, so you stop getting into trouble again. That way your mother will have less to worry about. I'll be in high school next year. I won't have time to fight, Rome said lazily, resting his chin on his hand, looking bored. Mhok glanced at them secretly. The two brothers had completely different images. Kian was like a cold block of ice, while Rome was like a calm sea, though he didn't know if a storm lurked beneath. Rome noticed Mhok's gaze and raised his head to look at him. Mhok did not avoid it. After a moment, Rome looked away. Rome, calm down. I believe Mhok will become your best friend. The middle-aged man looked at his son tenderly. And Kian, don't shut yourself off. Not everyone in this world is bad. At least I trust my own judgment. The two brothers fell silent and offered no argument. Vasily turned to Mhok, his eyes sharp once more. I have already enrolled you. My two sons are now in your care. Please don't let me down. Yes, sir. Mhok lowered his head and answered evenly, paying no attention to the other two's scrutiny. Vasily's frown relaxed, and the seriousness on his face eased a little. You two go out first. I'll talk to Mhok alone. Kian and Rome exchanged a look, then stood. Kian nodded slightly to his father and pulled Rome out of the room. Mhok sat quietly until he heard the door close. The middle-aged man sighed and seemed to age a little. Mhok watched him in silence, his face still calm. It's been a hard journey. I'm glad you chose this path. Mhok lowered his head and silently disagreed. He was not glad about this. I didn't bring you here to be my subordinate or bodyguard, Vasily continued, his gaze piercing. I want you to be my son's confidant. Mhok kept his head slightly bowed. He had understood this man's nature from the first day they met. Being a confidant meant growing up beside the future gang leader, becoming everything to him, supporting him, helping him, even opposing him when he made mistakes, and dying for him if necessary. I understand, he replied, though he didn't quite believe it. Was there really anyone who could do that without being killed early? They may be a little difficult to get along with. I hope you can be patient. Vasili smiled, a sly glint in his eyes. But if they're truly unreasonable, you have my permission to act. I won't blame you. Just don't stab them with your dagger. Mhok froze for a moment, then looked up with confusion. He hadn't expected a father to allow someone to beat his sons. Is that really allowed? Sir, you know I'm not the merciful type. Don't show them mercy. They're thick-skinned and tough. It won't hurt if you don't hit them with full force, Vasili said easily. This is why I brought you here. I promise I won't punish you. Mhok lowered his head slightly. Though he had no intention of doing so, he tucked the permission away in case of emergency. He nodded without arguing, simply hoping he would never actually need to fight the young masters. Go on. Get along with them. I think you and Kian will manage well. He's a little suspicious and possessive, but he won't harm others. The middle-aged man sighed. As for Rome, you'll need more patience. Mhok frowned, wondering what exactly was wrong with that young master to warrant Vasili's repeated reminders to be patient. He hoped they wouldn't cause trouble. Mhok silently followed Alof, sizing up the Russian man as they walked. Alof was tall, muscular, probably in his 30s, but the aura he gave off felt faintly threatening. This is probably what a gang enforcer looks like. Alof led him through the mansion's backyard to a white, one-story building. The aroma of food drifted from it, and Mhok guessed it was the kitchen. The third floor is a restricted area, the private quarters of the Arseni family. No one is allowed up without orders or an escort. Alof explained as he led him into the white building. On the right side of the second floor are the studies of the master and the young masters. No one enters without orders. The left side is Madame's area. Only the ground floor is open to you. This building is the kitchen, where you eat. Mhok gave a brief nod. The mansion felt livelier than he had imagined. He had heard that crime bosses lived in luxury, but were cold and heartless. This family, however, though not overly close, showed love for one another and had no obvious fractures. So much so that it made him jealous. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly before he composed himself, letting no one see. Master Kian is waiting for you in the study. I'll take you there after breakfast, Alof said, leading him inside. The interior looked like a canteen, with a high domed ceiling for ventilation that kept it from feeling stuffy. In the middle was a long table, and inside was a kitchen counter lined with silver plates. Alof handed him a silver plate and began scooping food. Self-service. Take as much as you like. Food is available all day, but you have to finish it. Otherwise, the chef here will chase you down and beat you. Mhok nodded and glanced at Alof's plate. It had 4 compartments and was so large he doubted he could eat half that much, but Alof filled it expertly. Mhok looked at the spread. Most of the food was an American-style breakfast. He took 3 slices of toast, fried eggs, ham and bacon, plus butter and strawberry jam, then followed Alof to the table. Several men were already seated, nearly all of them tall and dressed in black, likely bodyguards. Mhok, an Asian teenager who had just turned 15, looked particularly thin, like a dwarf among giants. Mhok studied the others quietly. Their plates were heaped with food. Though his own plate wasn't small, it looked nothing like theirs. New here? Asked a man in black at the table. He had a dark complexion and a noticeable scar on his cheek. Though it was only a shallow mark, it made his face look even more ferocious. He's Master Kian's new assistant, Alof introduced briefly. These are the main bodyguard team of the Arseni family. Mhok gave a silent nod and stared down at his plate, feeling he had looked at the man too long. A low laugh came from beside him, and then Kalefu clapped him heavily on the shoulder. Don't be afraid. We're all family here. No one will hurt you. The scarred man grinned. My name is Kalefu. What's yours? Are you 13? Why'd you follow the big boss here? Mhok blinked. Seeing the other man trying to be sincere, he forced a smile. The expression, paired with the scar, made Kalefu look even more frightening, like a threat rather than friendliness. If he were a child, he'd probably cry in fear. Mhok, 16 years old. He held out his hand, but Kalefu's eyes widened in surprise. You're 16? Older than the young master. Kalefu said loudly, even pointing at him. Don't lie. What matters here is your ability. No one cares if you're a kid or not. Mhok sighed, feeling slighted, and frowned a little. Silently, he took out his ID card and handed it over. Kalefu's eyes widened again, and he turned to Alof. Boss, did you get him a fake ID? Alof sighed and shot Kalefu a look. Kalefu shrank back and returned the ID card to Mhok. But within 2 minutes, he was leaning over to inspect his plate again. Are you afraid of the boss, Mhok? The food here's free. Scoop as much as you want. No need to hold back. Kalefu patted his shoulder again, nearly knocking him off balance. That's all I usually eat. That's your normal amount? No wonder you're so skinny. You eat like a cat. Kalefu complained, piling sausages onto his plate. How are you going to grow taller eating so little? Have some sausages. They're delicious, even better with beer. Mhok looked down at his own plate, then at Kalefu's, with a hint of helplessness in his eyes. How could these people call him small? They were the only giants around here. I don't want them, he answered calmly, a trace of displeasure on his face. He pushed the sausages back onto Kalefu's plate. Kalefu just threw his head back and laughed. Enough. Alof cut in, though his tone wasn't harsh. Follow me when you're done. The master is waiting. Mhok ignored the big man, quickly finished the food on his plate, drank a large glass of water, and immediately followed Alof out. It was time to meet his new master. Chapter 3. Alof took him back to the second floor of the villa, and Mhok noticed for the first time that besides the large wooden door he had entered that morning, there were 2 smaller doors not far apart. They stopped at the first door and knocked a few times before the person inside permitted them to enter. Alof pushed the door open and gave a slight nod, signaling him to go in. Mhok walked to the center of the room and turned to face the young man sitting behind the desk. His expression remained calm, though secretly he sized up his new master. Kian was a tall young man with a beautifully muscled frame, solid posture, and a strong physical foundation. His smoky gray eyes quietly scanned the documents in his hands, and his dark hair was combed back to keep it from his eyes. Mhok shifted his gaze to the thick file in Kian's hand and was about 70% sure it was his own personal file. What are you doing here? After a long silence, broken only by the sound of slowly turning pages, Kian spoke first. I'm here to be Master Kian's confidant, Mhok answered evenly, his tone devoid of emotion. Your resume is outstanding, Kian continued, unbothered by that answer. Your academic performance, training results, skills assessment, you scored high in every aspect. I admire that. Mhok stood quietly without saying anything. Those achievements were nothing to be proud of for him, merely tasks he had been forced to complete. But I don't trust anyone anymore. Kian raised his eyes, his smoky gray gaze narrowing with vigilance. Mhok's eyebrows lifted slightly. Though he didn't care much, he knew the background of the person in front of him well enough. The young master of the Arseni family, a young man who had been betrayed, a boy who refused to trust anyone outside his family. The corner of his mouth curled into a faint smile. He felt no pressure at all. I think Master Kian may have some misunderstandings, Mhok said calmly. My job is not to make you trust me. Your trust is precious, but it is not essential to my work. Kian frowned, a glimmer of interest flashing through his cold, smoky gray eyes. Seeing this, Mhok's smile widened slightly, a confident glow appearing on his face. What do you mean? My duty is to support you, help you, protect you, and be your strength. He answered with confidence, and in an instant, the image of a seemingly frail Asian boy disappeared. Whether you trust me or not, my duty is not to betray you. Someone like you, with no background, won't betray me. Kian's mouth curved slightly, a gleam in his eyes. Aren't those who want to hurt you the ones with backgrounds? Mhok tilted his head slightly, asking casually. I don't think my past is something Master Kian needs to concern himself with. The young master leaned back in his chair, folding his hands on his knees. What should I concern myself with? Master Kian should concern himself with making the most of me. Mhok smiled brightly, his eyes narrowing. Because that is my duty as your confidant. The two stared at each other quietly. The challenge in Mhok's eyes made Kian laugh softly. The satisfied look on his face made Mhok unconsciously relax his tense shoulders. The charged atmosphere gradually dissipated. Kian was indeed the young master of a Mafia family. That's a good answer, but I need to see if you're really as capable as you claim. Kian turned away from the light and opened another document. What do you think of Zhao He's company? A major Japanese Mafia family? Mhok raised his eyebrows slightly, glancing at the document in his master's hand. That is a very interesting gamble. Everyone says it was the family's last struggle before collapse. Kian glanced at him, raising an eyebrow. Mhok smiled softly and shook his head in denial. Sho Hyuk's influence in Japan runs far deeper than that. It penetrates beyond a typical mafia family. Even if the world changes, they can still stand firm. Kian pointed precisely to 2 spots in the document. They are officially establishing a company. This is the correct path for their resurgence. If everything goes according to plan, enormous amounts of money will pour in. Rather than waiting for Zhao He to make a mistake, your move into the Asian market would be more appropriate. Kian raised his head, his smoky gray eyes seeming to sparkle, a satisfied smile at the corner of his mouth. It had been a long time since he had met someone who could follow his thoughts and speak the same language. Even if that person was only a 16-year-old boy. I agree to let you become my confidant. Don't let me down. Mhok blinked, a little confused, then bowed his head in gratitude, a pleasant smile on his face. At least working with his new master wouldn't be as difficult as he had imagined. Rome frowned, leaning back on the sofa in bewilderment, staring at the scene before him. 2 weeks had passed since that stranger had moved into his home, and he emphasized the word stranger. He had absolutely no intention of accepting the skinny Asian boy as a friend, despite his mother's best efforts to convince him. At first, his brother had seemed to share his view. Kian wasn't going to open up to anyone or trust anyone, and Rome was convinced the Asian boy would be ignored and fade into some corner of the house. So he hadn't worried too much. But now, back from his trip, he was looking at a completely different picture. Mhok, where's the previous document? Kian asked, handing over a stack of papers. The Asian boy on the sofa turned and answered instantly. It's in the 3rd folder. The one you'll need next is in the 4th. I've already sorted them. Rome sat on the opposite sofa, a small table piled with documents between them, and frowned even harder. He almost wanted to shout, demanding to know how this guy had familiarized himself with his brother's documents in just 2 weeks. He was the younger brother, and he didn't even know these things. Pine, why is he still here? Rome complained, but his brother merely raised his eyes with a trace of impatience. Stop calling him that guy. It's rude. Rome's mouth fell open, his eyes nearly bulging out. Sure, Pine often looked impatient with him and had shooed him away plenty of times, but never in front of the Asian boy. Pine, are you seriously being nicer to a stranger than to me? The younger brother's complaint stretched into a whine. He nearly lunged to hug his brother's legs. I am your brother, Pine. Look at me. I'm not treating him better than you. It's just that my confidant is more useful to me right now than you are, Rome. Rome's mouth gaped, tears nearly forming. He could only slump and bang his head against the sofa, grumbling bitterly about being pushed aside during his brother's work. Kian set down his pen, sighed, glanced at his brother, then turned to his confidant. Bring me an espresso, please. Mhok quietly breathed a sigh of relief, nodded, and gladly stood and left the room, leaving the brothers alone. Rome watched him go, and once the door was firmly shut, he rushed to his brother's desk. Pine, can we really trust that guy? I don't trust him, and Mhok doesn't ask me to trust him. What does that mean? Rome frowned, completely unable to follow this conversation. Isn't he your confidant? Your future right-hand man? And you don't trust him? Kian turned his head and sighed, a hint of helplessness in his eyes. Do you know how Mhok came to our house? Mom brought him back from Thailand, Rome answered flatly. His brother rolled his eyes. Dad approved it. Kian rested his chin on one hand, looking at his brother without expression. Mhok was examined and trained. Dad chose him from hundreds of children purchased as candidates for my confidant. Mhok is the best. Do you understand? Kian didn't trust Mhok. He trusted his father and mother, and those two would only choose someone at least barely trustworthy for him. I can be Pioneer's confidant. There was no need to bring him here. Rome's face remained sullen, and he couldn't help turning away. He was a possessive, hot-tempered child, not as thoughtful as his brother, but he couldn't suppress his irritation at a newcomer suddenly entering his territory, someone chosen by his father, praised by his mother, and now favored by his brother. Kian smiled, almost guessing what his brother was thinking, but he had no intention of offering comfort. You? As my confidant? Why not? How am I worse than him? Rome folded his arms, straightened up, and let his arrogance show. I'm stronger, better at fighting, more knowledgeable about family affairs, and better looking than him. Kian immediately shot him an impatient look, but Rome didn't care. He was telling the truth. How could that skinny Asian boy be better than him? Mhok's high school entrance score is higher than yours. That doesn't count. Kian sighed again at his brother's quick retort, not knowing how to explain it. The position of confidant isn't just about muscle, Rome. The young man lowered his head and refocused on his documents. And Mhok's combat performance isn't bad at all. He might even be better than you. That shrimp? The coach is exaggerating. Rome remained unconvinced, dissatisfaction thick in his voice. I believe Mhok is a few months older than you. He's younger than me. Definitely younger than me. Kian frowned, tempted to ask if Rome calculated age based on body size, but seeing his brother's irritation, he didn't bother to argue. Calm down, Rome. Stop being so hostile toward Mhok. I haven't seen him do anything to you. Kian ignored his brother and returned his focus to his work. Mhok is very capable. If you calm down and let him help you with tutoring, you won't have to worry about your test scores. Rome snorted. Does someone like me need that Asian boy to teach me? I repeat, Mhok is a few months older than you. The young man's voice carried a hint of amusement. He knew exactly how stubborn his brother was. Relax. Mhok is here to help, not to replace you. There's no need to compete. Who said I'm worried? Even if we compete, I won't lose. He's your friend. You should get to know him as soon as possible. There's no point in comparing. Kian spoke without looking up. And Mhok is very smart, good at his studies, and has no trouble communicating with me. You should ask him to help you. Then you won't have to stress about your grades this year. What? Pine, you're favoring him. Rome protested, his mouth falling open. His brother had brought up his weakness again. He grabbed a pillow from the sofa and squeezed it hard to vent his frustration. Even without him, I can pass easily. If you're so confident, then go back to your room and rest, and stop worrying about Mhok. The elder brother waved a dismissive hand and went back to reading his folder, ignoring his younger brother entirely. Rome, still unsatisfied, shuffled out of his brother's room muttering, his lips pressed tightly together, his heart full of frustration. Thinking of that face, always so calm, as if silently laughing at him, made his anger burn even hotter. There's no way that Asian boy had no flaws. He definitely had weaknesses, and he was going to find them. He narrowed his eyes, a wicked smile curling at the corner of his mouth. He didn't believe that Asian boy was truly capable of everything. That guy had a weakness, and he was definitely going to find it. Chapter 4. Mhok was used to getting up early, even before dawn. Since growing accustomed to the mansion, he had shifted his morning exercise from indoors to running the grounds. After working up a good sweat, he would head to the mansion's gym for muscle-building training. He had learned that this place was set up with ALOF's help. A few days ago, ALOF had seen him running around the mansion in the morning and invited him to use the gym. Mhok was a little surprised that the Arseni family's benefits for household staff included a gym, and that all the equipment was expensive, high-quality gear. After a satisfying workout, Mhok would return to his room for a shower, change his clothes, and head to the kitchen to start his day's work. This was his daily routine, gradually settling into place. Mhok held his coffee cup and sipped slowly, his eyes lowered, glancing behind him quietly without leaving any trace. Over the past few days, there had been something unusual about his routine. In addition to the suspicious looks from other family members, there was also a pair of gray eyes constantly watching him from a distance. He frowned slightly, but said nothing. Though being stared at like this was strange and even a little annoying, he sensed no malice. No, while there was no malice, there was definitely hostility. He sighed inwardly and lifted his coffee cup again, wondering how to handle this. If he simply walked over and spoke directly, would they be able to understand each other? But judging by those wary eyes, he wasn't sure if that would just start an argument. At the very least, he wanted to turn around and tell the other party that this tracking method was truly terrible. He had noticed the pursuit almost the moment it began, let alone here, in this confined mansion. Mhok shook his head slightly and decided to pretend he didn't know. Someone as impatient and impulsive as Rome wouldn't tolerate playing the stalker for long. He drank the rest of the coffee, returned the cup to the tray in the dining area, then headed straight for the library on the upper floor. The Arseni mansion had a small library, and the young master had told him to study and prepare if he had free time. If possible, he wanted Mhok to skip a grade. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to keep up with him. At the time, Mhok had raised his eyebrows, expressionless, as if questioning whether that was really so simple. But when the other party arched an eyebrow and asked, "Can't you do it?" he could only sigh and agree. These brothers were truly annoying. Was that enough? Mhok selected 2 books covering high school material. If he wanted to skip a grade and enter university, he would at least need to pass the final year high school exams. He had just rounded a bookshelf when he heard a heavy object crash to the floor. Mhok startled and hurried back, remembering the person who had been following him since morning. To be honest, he wasn't particularly worried about the young master's safety. He was more concerned about whatever had fallen. But if he completely ignored him, it might cause trouble. Drawing closer, he heard the other party curse a few words under his breath, his tone thick with irritation. Mhok stopped and looked sideways past the bookshelf, trying to suppress the dryness on his face. A tall figure stood there, restless, with long dark gray hair hanging down, which he was impatiently shoving back with both hands. A pile of large books lay on the floor, clearly kicked over accidentally while he had been following. "Are you all right?" Mhok asked, his eyes sweeping over him to check for any sign of injury. But Rome suddenly flinched, his shoulders trembling slightly, and his eyes snapped toward him. "What would be wrong with me?" "Humph." The young man crossed his arms, lifted his chin, and looked arrogant. Seeing this, Mhok felt a little annoyed but also a little amused. Those gray eyes were still stealing glances at him. "I meant, are the books all right?" he said calmly, then stepped forward, bent down, and began gathering them up. "What? Are you looking for trouble?" Rome asked gruffly, turning his head to glare at him. Mhok's face remained expressionless. Only a hint of a smile flickered in his eyes. "I'm not looking for trouble. But these books are rare and expensive. How can I not care about them?" He sorted the books and gently brushed the dust from the covers. The young master still looked irritable and annoyed. In a rough voice, he demanded, "Shouldn't you care about me first, not these books?" "But you just said you were fine." Mhok answered without raising his head, his hands still busy arranging the books, ignoring him entirely. Rome pressed his lips together and stared unblinkingly at the smaller man. Mhok felt the hostile gaze, but chose to ignore it. This was hardly the first time he'd been stared at with hostility, let alone the first time in recent days that the other had observed him so intently. Besides, these brothers' gazes had never truly made him uncomfortable. They were vigilant, assessing, even hostile, but never the kind of contemptuous rudeness that made him feel sick. That was precisely why he had readily accepted the offer to follow the young master of the Arseni family. He gathered the books, turned his back to Rome, and planned to place them neatly on the shelf. To his surprise, a large hand suddenly reached over and took nearly half the stack from his arms. Can those skinny arms really carry so many books? Rome raised his head, a trace of mockery in his eyes. "Since you're so small, I'll help you." "I didn't ask for your help," Mhok said, a little dissatisfaction in his eyes. But he didn't snatch the books back. After all, these books belonged to Rome. Whatever he wanted to do was his business, and Mhok had no right to be annoyed. But being called small, that was something he could never accept. Rome let out a discontented humph from his throat, but did not put the books down. He followed with long strides, his face openly unhappy. This left Mhok puzzled. If the other boy disliked him so much, why did he keep following him around? Mhok drew a deep breath and exhaled slowly, steadying his mood. He shouldn't let something this meaningless upset him. Although the other person was only a few months younger than him, his behavior was clearly far more childish. "Anyway, what are you doing here? Don't you know this is the family library?" Rome spoke again in a stiff tone, obviously picking a fight rather than genuinely scolding. "Master Thee allowed me to come here," Mhok answered without expression, continuing to focus on shelving the books. But the tall young man had no intention of giving up. He followed and stopped right beside him, still holding several books that clearly belonged on entirely different shelves. "Can you even read all of it? This library doesn't only have books in English and Asian languages." Rome puffed out his chest, boasting, "I can read in 3 languages myself. What about you? How many can you read?" Mhok shot him a sideways glance. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly, then settled. A faint gleam shone in his eyes. "I can read 5. He heard the other boy let out a sharp ha, then a forced cough to cover it. Rome crossed his arms, his frown deepening, his face the picture of dissatisfaction. After Mhok finished shelving the last book, he turned around and decided to clear the air. Master Rome, you've been following me for several days now. What do you want from me? Who's following you? The young man shot back gruffly, slamming the books heavily onto the edge of a shelf. Then why are you watching me? Mhok kept his expression calm, though inwardly he wanted to sigh. Don't tell me you haven't been following me, Master Rome. You're far too impatient, and your footsteps are so loud. I knew you were tailing me from the very first day. Rome was an impatient and blunt person who had never needed to stalk anyone. Mhok could easily tell when he deliberately slowed down or stopped. The other boy would start fidgeting almost instantly. The half-Russian stood speechless for a moment, his eyes darting around, his arms still tight across his chest. Mhok stole a glance and guessed this was the other's tell when he had nothing to say. He couldn't help feeling amused. He decided to turn and pick up the books the other had set down, pretending he would simply leave without waiting for an answer. Where are you going? We're not finished talking. I'm going to continue organizing the books, since Master Rome doesn't want to talk to me. Mhok walked straight toward the next bookshelf. I'm here to keep an eye on you. Is there a problem? Rome followed after him, his tone still rigid. Have I done anything suspicious that requires you to watch me like this? Not yet, but I don't trust you. Mhok stopped walking. He sighed and decided to turn and look the other in the eye, making himself as serious as possible. He still had to stay here for years to come, and he couldn't have himself suspected and followed like this every single day. I have never asked for your trust. The only thing I insist upon is that I take responsibility for what I say. If I said I am here to serve the Arseni family, then I will hold to that and never betray it. His tone was firmer than ever before, his gaze unwavering. But if one day I lose that conviction and decide to pledge loyalty elsewhere, I will leave the Arseni family immediately. Mhok was not a good man, nor was he blindly loyal enough to sacrifice his life for this place. But he would never break a promise. So, if you have any questions, just ask me directly. If I know, I will answer. He turned back around and continued sorting, sliding books neatly into place. If I don't know, I will tell you honestly. I hope Master Rome can understand. Rome pursed his lips slightly. His frown slowly relaxed, the sharpness in his eyes softening a little, even carrying a hint of satisfaction. Is there anything you can't do? Rome suddenly asked. Mhok's eyebrows lifted slightly, his hands still arranging books. Suddenly, the situation in front of him seemed to click. Of course there are things I can't do, Master Rome. There are things you can't do that I can. We're about the same age. Rome looked serious, as if discussing something of great importance. Can you drive? Yes, Mhok answered. Though at 16 he was still too young for a license, he had learned to drive in various circumstances. Still, given the choice, he preferred to obey the law and not drive recklessly. I can use a gun. Rome refused to give up, which only made Mhok feel even more helpless. I can do that too. Mhok glanced at him. Don't forget, I'm your personal bodyguard. The young man gritted his teeth, his face full of frustration. Then tell me your weaknesses. Who would tell anyone something like that? Mhok couldn't help laughing. He hadn't expected the other boy to ask so directly. Rome froze for a moment, and his inner irritation seemed to ease at the sound of that crisp laughter. His gray eyes lingered on the other's face. The face that was usually so expressionless now carried the faint trace of a smile. Didn't you say you'd answer if I asked? The young man said, his tone much softer. Mhok raised his eyebrows, a little puzzled, but decided not to press further. With someone this hot-tempered, asking too many questions would only cause trouble. If I'm able to answer, I will. Mhok put away his smile, and his face returned to its usual calm, though the corner of his mouth still held a faint curve. He put away the last book, turned to pick up the ones he had chosen, and glanced at the other boy with a slightly challenging look. In any case, I'm going to be around Master Rome for a long time. You can take all the time you need to look for them. Chapter 5. Rome frowned and crossed out the sentence written in his notebook. For the past week, he had been trying to change that calm face. The face did change, but it shifted from a blank expression to a mocking smile, which made him feel utterly irritated. What made him even more irritated was that he could never seem to wipe away that faint smile from the library. The thin figure had slightly yellowish skin, not as fair as a European's, but it made the blush on his cheeks more obvious. When he lowered his head, his thick eyelashes cast shadows on his face, his thin lips slightly raised, and his black eyes curved gently, as if they glittered with light. Cute. Rome banged his head against the table, immediately cutting off that train of thought. Cute? Ridiculous. He turned his attention back to the little notebook in his hand, glaring at the crossed-out entries with immense frustration. Nothing had worked out. It was infuriating. At first, he had tried throwing a fake snake at him. Mhok simply turned around and gave him a disgusted look, as if scolding him, and told him to throw the thing away and not make a mess. A few days later, he had invited Mhok to watch a horror movie together at night, confident it was the scariest thing he had ever seen. Surely, at this hour, late at night, the skinny Asian boy would cry in fear. What's so scary about a ghost that can only float around and make things float? The Asian boy had asked, his face utterly devoid of fear. Why? Have you ever seen a scarier ghost? He had retorted, though he could feel his voice starting to tremble. Mhok had smiled slightly, his voice dropping so low it was nearly a whisper. His body, sitting on the same sofa, had slowly inched closer, so close Rome could feel the faint body heat radiating from him. It had made his heart jump. The atmosphere had been terrible. A photographer and his girlfriend were driving back from a trip. While turning, they hit and killed someone. Mhok's eyes had gradually turned cold, the light fading from them. They pretended nothing happened, left the body behind, and went home. But not long after, they noticed that every time they took a photo, there was always a white shadow in the picture. Rome had frozen, his eyes slightly wide, his heartbeat so loud he could almost hear it. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed, the coolness of mint and the sweetness of vanilla drifting through the air, making the hair all over his body stand on end. They took more pictures, trying to figure out what the white shadow was. Meanwhile, the young photographer felt his body growing heavier and heavier. Mhok had continued, his tone slow and cold, until the final picture developed, a female figure, sitting on the photographer's neck. She laughed sharply, then grabbed his neck and twisted it with a crackling sound. The tall figure had turned pale, his hand flying to his own neck unconsciously. Mhok had burst out laughing at the sight. He hadn't expected the horror story he'd adapted on the spot to work so well. Go to bed. It's late. Mhok had stood, preparing to turn off the TV. But the tall figure had edged closer, folding his arms tightly across his chest, turning his face away as if he didn't care, yet refusing to leave. In the end, Mhok had to escort him to the third floor because he was too scared to go upstairs alone. What the hell? Rome covered his face with his hands, remembering that day. He wasn't afraid of ghosts. But the story was too terrifying, and Mhok was far too calm. Cold-blooded. Cruel. Not cute at all. He stuffed the notebook back into the drawer and decided to go out. School was starting in a few days, so he would go buy some supplies. When he reached the stairs, he spotted the thin figure emerging from his brother's office. At the sight of that calm face, his eyebrows twitched unconsciously. That little guy. For some reason, he could never defeat him. Hey, Rome called out. When the other boy turned, he waved him over. Where's your brother? Mhok raised his eyebrows, not caring that the other hadn't used his name. By now he was used to it. Since coming to this family, Rome had never called him by name. Always, hey, or you. So much so that Mhok had begun to wonder if the other had some kind of language barrier. Forget it. Better not to ask, to avoid trouble. Master Thee went to watch TV with Madam, Mhok answered as he approached, then asked bluntly, Master Rome, what do you want to talk to me about? The young man crossed his arms, stroking his chin lightly with one hand, a sly smile forming. School starts next week. Have you prepared everything? Master Thee has prepared it for me, Mhok replied calmly, deciding not to pay him much mind. But Rome quickened his pace and closed in, his long legs eating up the distance in just a few steps. That's just the necessities. You're going to be living in the dormitory. Are your personal things ready? He threw an arm around Mhok's neck without forcing him, his mind racing through the next phase of his plan. It's ready. Mhok insisted on his original answer, but Rome wasn't listening. He pulled him out of the house, then cheerfully deposited the thin figure into the car. Today, he would definitely find that guy's weakness. Mhok was an orphan who didn't know who his parents were. He had grown up in an orphanage, but because he had shown the potential of a genius from a young age, he was eventually adopted by an adult. To be more precise, he was bought. After being adopted, he was subjected to extremely strict discipline. He lived under immense pressure, and had almost no happy childhood. He was forced to mature far too early, forced to think and struggle constantly, or else he would die. So this could be called his first real shopping trip. Mhok tried to hide his excitement, looking around slowly, letting the boss's youngest son walk ahead while he followed behind. He could show excitement in front of anyone, but never in front of Rome. Mhok silently repeated this in his heart and quickened his pace to keep up. Though the mall wasn't crowded now, Rome definitely wouldn't come looking for him if he got lost. Of course, he wasn't afraid of being left behind. He was sure he had the wits to take a taxi back to the manor. But the thought of being laughed at for weeks afterward was unbearable. It seemed that it wasn't just Rome who hadn't fully shed his childish side. Soon, they reached the supermarket in the mall's basement. The tall figure strode in without paying any attention to his surroundings. Mhok had to follow behind with the shopping cart. Rome disappeared behind the shelves after only a few steps. Fortunately, the other boy was tall and stood out in the crowd. "Which one do you want? Take it." The young man crossed his arms and turned to urge him, which immediately raised Mhok's suspicions. The attitude was far too strange. There had to be a scheme. Mhok narrowed his eyes, mentally running through the possibilities. On the surface, he answered calmly, "No, I just bought a large bottle for my room. I thought a small bottle for the dormitory would be enough. You'll be going back and forth between home and the dormitory all the time. You'll be living there for 3 years. Just buy a big bottle and keep it there so it doesn't go to waste." Rome's tone carried a trace of impatience as he nudged Mhok's back toward the shelf. "And soap. Take some. Buy it all. Don't worry about the money. I'm paying." Definitely strange. Mhok was almost certain of his guess. He didn't believe Rome would be so kind to him. With this attitude, there had to be bad intentions. But maybe because he had spent more time with him lately, or because he was the boss's son, Mhok didn't feel scared or disgusted by these schemes. Though he still felt a bit annoyed. He turned and selected a bottle of refreshing mint shampoo and a bar of vanilla-scented white soap. He had no skin issues and no allergies. He wasn't particular about body care. He just grabbed whatever would work. Rome looked down at the items in the shopping cart, then picked them up, his slender fingers stroking his chin as if deep in thought. This scent. Mhok raised an eyebrow and heard the other boy mumbling to himself, though he couldn't catch the words. Seeing that Rome was still fixated on the shampoo bottle, he simply turned away to look at other personal items. As Rome had said, he would be traveling between school and home often. It would be a hassle to keep running back and forth with a bag on his back. After Mhok selected the rest of his necessities, Rome immediately pushed the cart to check out, moving so fast it was as if he feared Mhok would bolt. After paying, the young man held the shopping bag in one hand and waved with the other, signaling him to follow quickly. "Are you hungry? Let's go find something to eat." Rome grabbed his arm and half pulled him along. Mhok frowned slightly, but followed obediently. Finally, his suspicions were confirmed when Rome brought him to a Sichuan restaurant. This well-known restaurant was in the center of the mall, with an elegant atmosphere and Chinese lanterns decorating the space. The red and gold color scheme seemed to match the fiery style of Sichuan cuisine. Rome excitedly pulled him inside, opened the menu, and quickly ordered 5 or 6 dishes with surprising skill. Mhok listened carefully, and the corners of his mouth twitched. He nearly laughed, but managed to hold it in. The boss's youngest son. How could he be so easy to see through? "I love this restaurant. The food is amazing." Rome's tone sounded relaxed, his shoulders loosening, his eyes sparkling with anticipation. "But you're so small. Can you handle it?" Mhok raised an eyebrow but didn't answer, a hint of amusement in his eyes. While they waited for the food, Rome took the initiative, opening up and talking about many things. Mhok just listened quietly, occasionally sipping his warm tea, silently filing away important information. Soon, the dishes arrived. Almost every one was bright red, the aroma of chili and spices filling the air. Mhok held back his laughter as he watched Rome fumble awkwardly with chopsticks. He said nothing, letting the other boy start eating first while he picked up his own food with practiced ease. "How is it?" "Delicious," Rome asked, not noticing that his lips had already begun to turn slightly red. "But if it's too spicy, don't push yourself. I like strong flavors. You might not be able to take it. Eat the tofu over there." Mhok chewed his food slowly, considering how to answer. The food was delicious, of course, but as for whether it was spicy, he could only say that aside from the aroma of the spices, He felt no heat at all. When opening a restaurant in a foreign country, the food is always adjusted to local tastes. Most Europeans can't handle much spice, so the flavors naturally won't be too intense. It's delicious, but it's not spicy at all. What a shame. Mhok decided to answer, trying not to sound sarcastic, even though he was about to burst out laughing. It could be made much spicier. It's a bit bland. Huh? What did you say? Rome froze, then quickly gulped down a few sips of water and several bites of food. His nose had already begun to turn a faint red. Master Rome, are you feeling the heat? Mhok feigned embarrassment, though his eyes were shining from the effort of holding back his laughter. Just a little, but it's delicious. The young man twisted his neck slightly, pretending to be nonchalant, stealing a glance at Mhok's calm face. You don't find it spicy at all? Not even a little? Mhok smiled slightly. He could almost hear Rome's mind spinning frantically. He simply picked up more food with practiced ease and replied, Master Rome, did you forget something? He tilted his head slightly and asked in his most innocent tone, I'm Asian. So what? Rome demanded, a note of irritation creeping in. I'm Thai. So what? Tom Yum Goong is Thai food. Pad Thai is Thai food. Green papaya salad is also Thai food. Mhok's answer made Rome stare with wide eyes, pointing at him, his lips still bright red from the spices. Did you want to see me cry from the spice? Mhok laughed softly, a teasing note in his voice, while his chopsticks continued picking up food without the slightest pause. Who would think that? I'm just asking. The tall figure turned his head away, looking thoroughly annoyed. Mhok couldn't help chuckling at the sight. He waved over the waiter and quietly ordered a few extra dishes. No more words passed between them. Rome sat across the table, arms folded, sulking, while Mhok continued eating at his leisure. After a while, the waiter returned and set the new dishes in front of the annoyed young man. This is pork belly stew, tender and just a little sweet and salty. And this is kung pao chicken. The flavor isn't too strong, just watch out for the dried chilies. Mhok's tone softened. He reached over and took away the other's hot tea. Swap your drink for milk. Rome shot him a sidelong glare, his expression fierce, as if ready to snap at him for meddling. But his lips were still bright red, which made the whole thing more funny than intimidating. Mhok's tightly pressed lips finally gave way, curving up as he let out a soft laugh. Rome stared at his lips for a long moment, until the laughter stopped. Then he lowered his head and picked up his chopsticks, his movements even clumsier than before. Between the two of them, only the sound of heartbeats and the quiet clink of cutlery echoed. Chapter 6. Mhok slid the knife back into his waistband with a clean, neat movement and shouldered his backpack. Beside him stood a rolling suitcase, not too large, made of metal, sturdy and durable. He even suspected it was bulletproof, yet light enough to lift with one hand. It stood in stark contrast to the waterproof backpack, which was cut-proof but frighteningly expensive. The suitcase had been prepared by his master to carry his belongings to school. Today, he and Rome would move into the dormitory together. The young man picked up the school's flyer and read it once more. Wester College was a famous private boarding school in Europe. Beyond the high tuition fees, the teaching was extremely strict. It had produced many outstanding alumni, and countless children of the rich and powerful were desperate to gain entry. However, due to the grueling entrance exams and the parent interview requirement, only around 100 students were admitted worldwide each year. He had stood out in the camp exam, the only one to pass, which was why he had been chosen as Master Th's future personal attendant. Mhok slipped the flyer into his bag, looked around the room one last time to ensure nothing was left behind, then closed his suitcase, locked the door, and prepared to load his luggage into the car. Mhok, are you done packing? The voice from the staircase made him look up. The second young master, Rome, who had been somewhat cold toward him lately, was descending from the upper floor, a trace of impatience on his face and a bag in his hand. The Arseni family was a little strange. Though they had dozens of servants and hundreds of bodyguards, the two young masters did almost everything themselves, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Mhok had never met young masters from other families, but he suspected other families were not like this. I've packed everything. Is Master Rome ready too? I'll move everything to the car. No, it's too heavy. You're so much shorter than me, you can't lift it. Rome stopped and straightened up slightly, as if to show off his height. Mhok narrowed his eyes. Though he felt this comparison was meaningless, he still felt a small sting of displeasure. Rome noticed his dissatisfaction, but instead of being put off, he burst out laughing. Then he changed the subject and stopped teasing. "Where's Payan?" Rome asked after his brother. The first-year high school students started a week early to handle dormitories and orientation. Payan was 2 years older and wouldn't go to school until the following week, so only he and Rome were leaving today. "Master Thee is watching TV with his wife," Mhok answered. He remembered that when he had gone to report the day's itinerary to Madam and the family, he had seen the eldest master watching TV seriously with his mother. "Watching Thai dramas again?" Rome looked disgusted. "My mother used to be a Thai star. I heard she was very popular. We've saved a lot of her dramas at home and take them out to watch when there's nothing else to do. The plots are just speechless." Master Thee said it's good language practice. Mhok defended the eldest master, though he silently agreed with Rome's assessment. Learning a language through TV shows? Sooner or later, you'll end up picking up bizarre expressions. Mhok did not argue, because he felt the same way. Finally, he followed Rome to the car parked at the door. The driver was already waiting. Mhok lowered his head slightly, took the luggage, and placed it neatly into the trunk. Rome opened the rear door and climbed in, waving for Mhok to join him. Mhok walked toward the passenger seat and was about to get in when he heard someone calling from behind. He stopped and turned in confusion. A tall bodyguard with a scarred face, ALOF, was jogging toward him. "What's going on, ALOF?" Lately, Mhok had grown closer to the main bodyguard team. He met them nearly every morning during exercise, especially ALOF, who lived nearby. He was closer to him than to the others. "You're leaving?" ALOF asked. Mhok nodded. ALOF pulled a small cloth pouch from his pocket and extended his hand. Mhok was puzzled, but did as expected. "Take this with you. It's a talisman. I bought it when I traveled to Japan at the end of last year. It keeps you safe." ALOF placed the lavender talisman into his palm, then handed him a glossy black fountain pen. "This pen was given to me by Captain Olaf." Then ALOF gave him a few more small items, most of them easy to carry and carrying warm meanings. Mhok didn't quite understand why he was suddenly receiving these gifts. Though he often chatted with the bodyguard team, they had only known each other for about a month. "You have a cell phone, right? Remember to keep it with you. Phones can do so many things nowadays." ALOF continued, not seeming to care whether Mhok responded. In truth, he had grown used to Mhok's quietness. Usually, Mhok would just look at him with those big eyes to show his interest. Mhok nodded. He had gotten the phone and studied it the week before. He knew it could connect to the internet, bringing the whole world to his fingertips. The phone numbers for all the bodyguards are stored in it. If you run into any problems, call us. If someone at school bullies you, teach them a lesson first, then call us. ALOF looked serious, as if he firmly believed the Asian boy in front of him was capable of exactly that. "I won't hit anyone," Mhok answered without expression, feeling as though he was being indoctrinated with some strange ideas. "Then call me and cry to me." ALOF shrugged, smiling faintly. "Everyone cares about you, you know? If you have any problems, call us. Have a safe trip. We'll be waiting here for you." The corner of Mhok's mouth lifted slightly, and he felt a warmth spread through his chest. He had never had anyone so concerned about his safety and well-being, let alone wish him good fortune. Today, receiving so much warm affection all at once had caught him off guard. This gangster family was actually warmer than his own. "Thank you." Mhok looked up at ALOF, a gentle smile on his face. "Please thank everyone for me, too. I'll take good care of everything." ALOF laughed, and in his self-appointed role as the Asian boy's older brother, he found Mhok's response adorable. ALOF ruffled Mhok's hair until it was a mess, then smiled and waved goodbye, telling him to get back in the car. This was the first time Mhok had ever felt that someone was waiting for his return, and the feeling was far better than he had expected. Rome sat in the back seat, arms crossed, his face a mask of impatience. His gray eyes were fixed on Mhok, who stood at the door talking to the bodyguard, and his irritation was building by the second. "Why do you have to act so reluctant to go to school?" Rome grumbled in his mind, staring unblinkingly at the two figures outside. When he saw Mhok's slightly confused expression as he reached out to accept the gifts, his annoyance spiked even higher. He didn't understand why this guy, who normally wore such a blank look, could act so endearing in front of other people. What's so cute about it? So annoying. He cursed inwardly, tapping his arm with impatience, nearly counting down the seconds until Mhok would get in the car. When he looked at Mhok again, his eyes nearly bulged. Alof was ruffling Mhok's hair with obvious familiarity, and although Mhok frowned, there was a faint smile at the corner of his mouth. Rome's heart twisted with fresh irritation. "What are you smiling about?" "Push him away." His mood not only refused to settle, but grew more intense. The driver glanced at him through the rearview mirror. Though he didn't fully understand the situation, he was well accustomed to the young master's mood swings. "Master, do you want me to go and call him?" the driver asked softly, assuming Rome's impatience was simply due to the wait. "No need." Rome kept his voice low, his gaze still locked on Mhok. "How long are they going to talk? Don't they know time is tight? There's still a long drive ahead." The driver could only raise his eyebrows in silence, swallowing his doubts, and leave the young master to his sulking. After a moment, Mhok opened the car door and slid back inside. Though the delay had been less than 5 minutes, to Rome it had felt like an hour. As soon as the door shut, Rome's question fired out. "You two are that close? So unwilling to part just to go to school?" Mhok froze, catching the anger in the other's tone, and was filled with confusion. "Sorry to have kept you waiting," Mhok replied. He didn't understand what he had done wrong, so he could only apologize first. "I'm not blaming you." Rome's brow relaxed slightly, his tone softening despite himself. Though he had a quick temper, he often found it hard to resist a gentle attitude. Especially in this matter. He didn't think Mhok had done anything wrong. He was just irritated for no reason at all. Rome sat in the back seat, pressing his lips together, hesitating for a moment before asking directly, "Are you close? Why do you have to say goodbye so formally? You're just going to school, but you're making it look like you're moving away." Mhok was puzzled for a moment, then nodded slightly, as if something had clicked. "Master Rome, don't be angry." Mhok's lips curved up a little, his voice soft. "Even though the master and his wife didn't come out to see you off, they care about you just as much." "I don't care about that." Mhok nodded with a look of complete understanding, then turned back around to sort through the gifts he had received, ignoring Rome's protests entirely. Rome opened his mouth to correct the misunderstanding, but seeing that Mhok was no longer responding, he could only sigh in frustration and let the unpleasant conversation die. Chapter 7. The black luxury European car drove through a massive carved iron gate. Beyond the gate stretched a long drive paved with beautiful bricks and stone. In the distance stood a row of buildings arranged in a horseshoe shape. At the center rose a huge dome, probably part of the auditorium. The car pulled up to one of the buildings and stopped. Several expensive luxury cars were already parked nearby. Today was the first day for first-year high school students to move into the dormitories, rooms where they would live for the next 3 years. Parents had arrived one after another to see their children off, and the scene was lively. Mhok got out of the car first. After taking in his surroundings, he couldn't help but look at his young master with sympathy. When they had left home, neither the master nor his wife had come out to see Rome off. Now the place was filled with students and their parents. He worried Rome might feel the absence keenly. Young Rome climbed out next, impatience written across his face and a deep irritation simmering in his chest. He hated crowded, noisy spaces. When he met Mhok's eyes, softer than usual, he froze for a moment. He thought that look was cute, but for some reason, it only made him more annoyed. Mhok withdrew his gaze, turned, and silently opened the trunk. He and the driver unloaded the luggage. From his backpack, he pulled out a document detailing the check-in information. Though he had already read through it, he opened it again to be sure. "Which room are you in?" Rome asked, stepping closer. He leaned forward and peered at the document in Mhok's hand from behind, his chest nearly touching Mhok's back. Mhok stiffened slightly, his body tensing without thought. But he said nothing. He simply drew a deep breath and forced himself to relax. "Room 304. The same room as Master Rome." He paused after answering, a small thought forming. "If Master Rome isn't satisfied with the arrangement, I can apply for a change." "Why would you change it?" Rome cut in impatiently, his narrowed eyes betraying a flash of irritation. "Don't make trouble. If you're uncomfortable, just deal with it. There's no need to switch rooms." "Isn't Master Rome dissatisfied?" Mhok tilted his head slightly, reflecting on everything he had studied. He had researched the young master's background thoroughly. When he had served Kian before, He had always been able to guess his master's needs accurately. He remembered that both brothers attached great importance to their private space. Each had a strong possessive streak, especially Rome with his volatile temper. He would grow extremely upset whenever someone encroached on his territory. That was precisely why Rome had lived alone in his dormitory throughout junior high. Did I say I was? Rome's tone was still irritable, stiff, but he found himself at a loss for words. He could only look away. Since it's already arranged, just stay. Besides, I still need to find your weaknesses. Living together will make it easier to keep an eye on you. The reasoning sounded flimsy, but as his employer, Mhok simply nodded and offered no argument. Inwardly, he felt a pang of resignation at having to look after this hot-tempered, willful young master. Rome's junior high school fighting record was alarmingly long and completely out of sync with Mhok's own nature. Mhok headed straight to the building's front desk to handle the formalities, leaving Rome standing by the car scrolling through his phone. He submitted the documents, signed, paid the deposit, and received the keys without incident. Because this school was an elite private institution where 80% of the students came from wealthy families, the security measures were exceptionally strict. The standard key cards had been replaced with electronic keys tipped with silver-edged cards, so luxurious they hardly looked like high school dormitory keys at all. Mhok stared at the two cards in his hand with a calm expression, though inside, he couldn't help grumbling at the extravagance. He was finally beginning to understand why the tuition was so steep. Master Thee had once explained to him that this was not merely a school, but a launchpad for building connections. The high tuition was a worthwhile investment in future development. He understood, but for someone with his weak interpersonal skills, this was no golden opportunity. Mhok frowned and began mentally mapping out how to adjust himself, how to become someone worthy of a core role in the Arseni family. He walked back toward Rome. Before he could look up, he realized Rome was no longer alone. Beside him stood a tall boy, roughly Rome's height, but noticeably bulkier. He had a thick arm slung around Rome's shoulders and was speaking to him with easy familiarity. His smile was bright, his eyes crinkled into slits, and his laughter rang out so clearly that Mhok couldn't help but stop in his tracks. He halted a few steps away, his gaze landing on the arm that was nearly as thick as his own head. His mind rapidly sifted through the information he had memorized. "Hey, who's this?" The sturdy young man spoke up suddenly, still smiling, though his eyes had gone cool. "My friend and I are busy. No time for introductions." "Vince, what are you on about?" Rome said with disgust, shoving the arm away. He gave a brief introduction. "This is Mhok. He came with me." "Vince, that's all you need to know." Vince Pierce, Rome's longtime friend. His family owned a well-known British tech company. Vince was the second son and a rugby player, hence the brawny build. "Huh? This kid came with you?" Vince stared at Mhok in surprise. Rome just waved his hand impatiently, uninterested in explaining, and turned to Mhok. "Is everything sorted?" "Yes, Master Rome. Here is the room card." Mhok dipped his head slightly, then handed over the black card. "Don't ignore me, Rome. You never said you had such a cute follower." Vince wedged himself back in, slinging his heavy arm around Mhok's shoulder as if they had known each other for years. "My name's Vince. Rome and I have been friends since the 5th grade. Where are you from? I've never seen you before." "Ignore him." Rome stepped over and shoved Vince's arm away with a slap. The two of them seemed ready to keep talking, so Mhok seized the chance to quietly step aside and position himself next to the suitcases. "I'll head up first, then, Master Rome." He lowered his head briefly, then bent to pick up his luggage. Rome immediately frowned and strode over. "How are you going to carry such a big box by yourself?" "I'm only carrying my own things." Mhok answered without expression. He had never said he would carry Rome's luggage. The master had reminded him repeatedly. He was an assistant, not Rome's servant. He was a student who had come to learn and prepare to assist Kian in the future. Rome ground his teeth, annoyed by Mhok's cold response. But faced with those clear black eyes, his anger sputtered out. He could only scuff his hair in frustration and snap. "Do whatever you want." "Wait." Vince, excluded from the exchange, cut in hastily and wedged his enormous frame between them. "You two are sharing a room? Isn't he a junior high kid? Mhok is the same age as us. How could he be in junior high? Don't talk nonsense." Rome gave the briefest possible explanation, then turned to urge Mhok. "Hurry up and go. There's too much stuff." Don't just stand there like an idiot. Mhok glanced at Vince's stunned expression with a flicker of doubt. But at Rome's urging, he simply nodded and dragged his suitcase toward the stairs. You're seriously letting him room with you? Vince's voice carried from behind. Mhok had no intention of eavesdropping, but hauling a large suitcase up the stairs made speed impossible, and Vince's loud voice remained clear even at a lower volume. He glanced back subtly. Rome's expression was one of pure impatience, clearly reluctant to have Mhok living with him. Mhok quickened his pace up the stairs, deciding to leave the remaining questions for later. He had already asked, and Rome had personally agreed to them living together. If problems arose down the line, he could apply for a room change then. Given the Arseni family's standing, it shouldn't be an issue. Rome watched Mhok disappear from view, then turned to face Vince, whose eyes were stretched wide. An expression of exaggerated shock plastered across his face that made Rome want to kick him. Are you sick, Vince? Rome demanded. He hated being questioned, especially about things he couldn't explain. Was he supposed to say he was monitoring Mhok to find his weaknesses? How embarrassing. Am I sick? Who is that guy? And why did you agree to room with him? Vince was still reeling. He whipped out his phone. I have to tell the others. This is massive news. Zach is going to lose it when he finds out you've been secretly hiding a kid. Rome punched Vince's shoulder to stop him from stirring up trouble, glaring coldly at the bigger boy who now pretended to be in pain. Vince rubbed his shoulder with theatrical flair, feigning hurt. So cruel. Not nearly as gentle as when you helped me move my luggage earlier. Vince pitched his voice high and made a show of wiping away tears. He leapt back just in time to dodge Rome's kick. Stop talking nonsense. That guy is Pion's follower. Master Thee has a follower? This kid must be something. Vince raised his eyebrows, curiosity coloring his tone. He was one of the few who knew what had happened to Kian. Or rather, he was the one who had stopped Kian from beating that bastard to death on the spot. Rome let out an irritable snort. Yeah, he and Pion get along great. Inseparable. Vince blew a long, low whistle, his interest in Mhok climbing higher. Impressive. Not only is he Master Thee's follower, but he got you to agree to share a room with him. I just want to keep an eye on him. That guy can't be trusted. Rome's voice was stiff. He refused to admit he had given any ground to Mhok, but he couldn't fully deny it either. He only wanted to find Mhok's weaknesses. Nothing more. Oh, he's worth your personal surveillance. Vince kept teasing, delighted by his friend's irritation. That kind of irritation, the kind with no real outlet, was rare. Rome glared at Vince, his annoyance starting to shift focus. He didn't understand why Vince was so interested in Mhok, or why he kept calling the guy interesting. It only grated on him more. He's just an attendant. Just an assistant. What's so interesting? He waved a hand, attempting to shut down the topic. Let's talk about something else. Are they here yet? Fine. Just an assistant. Vince laughed and clapped Rome on the shoulder. Zach isn't here yet, but I spotted cheered. As for your enemy, he arrived a full hour before you. That ridiculous stretch of a car held up half the road. Flashy as ever. Rome raised an eyebrow. The rival, Vince referred to as only one person. Enemy was too strong a word. Nuisance fit better. He still didn't understand why the other party was so hostile toward him. The two families had never even had a conflict. Lucio Vladio, only son of an Italian Mafia family, had marked him as an enemy from the moment they first met, even though they had never exchanged a single word. The other boy treated him like a competitor. Every encounter crackled with hostility, never a trace of civil communication. But to Rome, it was all just a tedious farce, more annoyance than genuine anger. Why should I care about him? Rome said coldly. He changed the subject. When's your next game? They went on talking of other things and let the matter drop. But Rome's eyes strayed to the stairwell again and again, as if he had grown used to searching for that Asian boy's figure in his line of sight. It seemed, having Mhok within view had become a habit. Chapter 8. Mhok dragged his suitcase upstairs and walked through a wide, clean, and tidy corridor. Room 304 was in the innermost corner of the building. He used the room card to unlock the door and pushed it open. The room was more ordinary than he had imagined, though it was nearly 3 times more spacious than any room he had ever lived in. The light brown wooden floor was smooth and bright, and the white walls were clean and refreshing, making him feel relaxed. A large window let the sun stream in. 2 beds sat against the walls, made up with white sheets. A large cabinet stood at the foot of each bed, 2 desks were placed side by side in the middle, and a door on the right likely led to the bathroom. He looked around and chose the left bed, the one beside the window. He remembered that Rome hated the heat and was easily woken by light. Mhok himself had no particular requirements for his sleeping environment, so he took the initiative and chose that side. Mhok began by checking the room's security. Beyond confirming that everything listed was present, he carefully swept for cameras and listening devices. After all, in addition to his duties as a close assistant, he also served as a bodyguard. Once he was satisfied the room was safe, he began unpacking. He didn't have much. Aside from a few personal items, there were only some clothes and shoes. Most of his clothes were simple and plain, mainly shirts and trousers, plus a few uniforms. The school did not require students to wear uniforms to class. They were only mandatory on certain important occasions. 2 or 3 sets of the expensive uniforms were more than enough. Mhok had just closed the cabinet door when he heard footsteps approaching. He looked over and saw the young master dragging a suitcase twice the size of his own. He walked over and asked, "Do you need help?" Rome glanced at the neatly made bed on the left, then at Mhok's pitifully small pile of luggage. A hint of impatience crossed his face. He casually shoved his suitcase to the right side of the bed with no apparent intention of unpacking. "No need. Are you finished already?" Mhok nodded. Rome frowned and asked, "Is that really all you have?" Mhok blinked, not entirely grasping the meaning of the question. For him, he had never truly owned anything of his own. Every time he went anywhere, he brought only the bare essentials. Rome looked as though he wanted to say something more, but in the end, he just sighed and swept a hand through his hair. "Just leave the box there. No need to unpack it now," he said offhandedly, then asked, "Where are you going next?" "You've got nothing to do the rest of the day." "I'm going to take a look around," Mhok replied. For him, being in an unfamiliar environment was highly dangerous. Taking a look around was not a casual stroll to enjoy the scenery. It was a literal security survey. Rome nodded, then walked to the door, turned back, and signaled with his eyes. "Let's go. I'll show you around." Mhok was a little puzzled, but he didn't object. Having a guide was better than groping around on his own. The young master walked ahead, and Mhok lagged behind by half a step. The two walked in silence, only the sound of their footsteps echoing in the corridor. Rome stole a glance at the person behind him. He found that Mhok had no visible interest in the new environment. His eyes swept over everything slowly and carefully, like a scanner. His face was locked in seriousness, his brows faintly furrowed, showing no sign of relaxation. Mhok noticed Rome's gaze. Beyond that, the people around them were also casting surprised looks his way. He was a little confused but chose to ignore it. It was probably just as Vince had said. Rome had never had an entourage before. A strange Asian boy suddenly trailing behind him was bound to draw eyes. He walked in silence until he noticed Rome slowing his pace. He slowed as well, careful not to walk side by side with the young master. "Does your looking around have to be so serious?" Rome said, a trace of impatience in his voice. His hands were in his pockets, his posture relaxed. "Isn't this how it's usually done?" Mhok asked in return, frowning. He was beginning to wonder how other bodyguards operated. In his previous life, Mhok had faced everything alone. Every time he was thrown into a new environment, the first thing he did was conduct a thorough survey, making absolutely sure he knew every escape route to handle any accident that might arise at any moment. But he had never protected anyone before. This duty was making him more anxious than usual without his realizing it, and his behavior had grown even more rigorous out of worry. Rome frowned, that familiar annoyed expression settling onto his face. He reached up and scrubbed at his hair, then finally said stiffly, "You can watch however you want." Mhok paused. He watched the grumpy young master cross his arms and turn away with impatience, yet stand there waiting for him, as if silently giving him permission to explore at his own pace. He was silent for a moment. His frown relaxed slightly. The corner of his mouth lifted, revealing a faint smile, and then he coughed lightly to cover his feelings. His young master might be a little annoying, but he had a gentle side too. "Let's continue," Mhok said, looking around. He softened his tone. "It's almost noon. Master Rome, are you hungry? Should we go eat?" A flash of satisfaction crossed Rome's eyes. He nodded slightly, signaling for Mhok to follow. The two of them walked much more slowly than before, almost like they were taking a stroll. Rome even took the initiative to introduce the surroundings. Mhok, a little surprised, listened carefully to every word. Aside from the main road circling the school, the campus was paved with decorative brick and stone paths. The only means of transport allowed was bicycles. Otherwise, everyone walked. There were 2 dormitory buildings, each divided into 2 wings, one for junior high school, the other for senior high. Building A stood at the front and housed the boys. Building B was behind it, with a park and a gym between them. The cafeteria lay beyond, encompassing both the school's main dining hall and an external restaurant. Rome led him to the cafeteria, a spacious hall with a high ceiling that allowed for good air circulation. In the center were round tables that could each seat 8 people, distributed so reasonably that the space never felt crowded. On one side was the food counter and the tray station. Beside them hung a large blackboard displaying the day's menu. Lunch was a free benefit from the school. The menu was rich and varied, the nutrition carefully balanced. If that didn't satisfy, students could visit the paid restaurant further back. There was even a small banquet hall that could be rented for private parties, though no alcoholic beverages were permitted. Today was move-in day for first-year junior high and first-year high school students. The cafeteria wasn't crowded. Rome grabbed a tray directly, selected items by number from the menu, and handed his card and tray to the waiting chef. Mhok did the same, and soon the 2 of them returned, each carrying a large plate of food. Mhok stared at his tray piled high with food and couldn't help blinking, a helpless look crossing his face. He thought of the meals he'd seen the Arseni family bodyguards eat and couldn't stop himself from wondering whether ordinary people genuinely ate this much. He set the tray down and sighed softly, for the first time feeling genuinely stressed by the sheer volume of food. "What's wrong?" Rome frowned and asked. Mhok just shook his head, sat down, and began eating in silence. In the end, he was full after finishing only half of it. His stomach was so stretched he couldn't manage another bite. Rome glanced at the leftovers and frowned, grumbling that he ate too little and would never grow. Mhok's mouth twitched faintly, and he glanced at Rome's spotless, empty tray. Silently, he complained in his heart, "Only you people eat that much." The 2 of them deposited their trays in the recycling area and walked out of the cafeteria. Rome stopped in front of the building and looked back at Mhok, who was still following behind. "Where do you want to go next?" Mhok raised his eyebrows, his expression one of confusion. It was his first time here. How was he supposed to know where to go? The information Master Thee had given him did not include a detailed campus map. Vasili had told him to come as a student. Naturally, he hadn't been given a map intended for a spy. "I'll go wherever Master Rome usually goes," Mhok replied, choosing the most practical solution. At least going to the places Rome frequented would help in any future emergencies. After all, he was still a member of the Arseni family. Rome was silent for a moment, frowning as if thinking hard. Finally, he nodded and motioned for him to follow. Rome led him through the center of the campus, introducing the landmarks as they walked. That was the classroom building. This was the music building. After circling the art building, they came upon a standard-sized football field, surrounded by several light brown structures arranged in neat lines. "Those are the gym and the indoor sports hall," Rome pointed. He gestured to the other side. "That's the outdoor sports area. Anyone can use it, so long as there's no club training scheduled." Mhok nodded and followed Rome into one of the gymnasiums. Rome pushed open a door, revealing a spacious domed hall with a thick, solid mat at its center. "This is the Fighting Arts Club," Rome said, pausing before adding casually. "To put it plainly, it's a place for people to fight." "You're being far too vulgar. This is art, not a place for idle brawling." A deep voice came from the side, and then a tall boy stepped out. He was about the same height as Rome, and though not as brawny as Vince, he had clearly defined muscles. He was handsome, blond and blue-eyed, with an outstanding presence. To Mhok, appearance was unimportant. What truly caught his attention was the other's stance. This person had no openings. Based on visual assessment alone, Mhok could not be certain he could defeat him without sustaining serious injuries. The first person who had ever made him feel that way was Rome. The one in front of him now was the second. But silently, he still awarded his young master a few more points. "Didn't Vince say you weren't coming, Zach?" Rome crossed his arms and eyed him with suspicion. Zach smiled brightly, charmingly, almost blindingly. A certain rare French beauty needed help with her luggage. As a gentleman, I naturally had no choice but to oblige. Zach Dren spoke in a relaxed tone, his handsome face looking even more suave. Zach turned toward the only Asian face in the room and found the other boy studying him openly, with a calm, evaluative gaze. It nearly made him laugh out loud. He couldn't help asking, "Who's this kid? I've never seen him before." Mhok shifted slightly, withdrew his gaze, and dipped his head in acknowledgement. "I am Master Thee's follower." "Master Thee?" Zach raised his voice, his expression a perfect mirror of Vince's earlier reaction. "Interesting. But you seem to be closer to Rome. Rome's never brought anyone here before." Mhok raised his eyebrows, a little surprised, but his face stayed calm. Master Thee and Master Rome both valued their privacy intensely. For someone of his low status to be described as having a close relationship with the master was obviously not a good thing, especially with someone as easily irritated as Rome. It was far more likely to breed displeasure. In this world divided by class, he shouldn't risk causing trouble. "You misunderstand," he said, the corner of his mouth rising slightly. "I am simply a subordinate of the Arseni family. Master Rome and I are not close. He is merely a little courteous toward me." Chapter 9. Rome frowned, feeling inexplicably irritated. He was a quick-tempered person, easily angered, so feeling irritated wasn't unusual. But this time, his irritation seemed to come from nowhere. He couldn't find the cause, yet his inner unease was overwhelming. They lived in the same room, slept in the same room, and yet Mhok said they weren't close? Humph. Go on, investigate whatever you want. Rome cut into the conversation between the two, his face full of obvious displeasure. His brows knitted together as he pulled his curious friend away. Rome was angry enough already, and with this inexplicable new anger layered on top, everything seemed to bother him. "What's wrong with you, Rome?" Zach asked with a smile, clearly used to his friend's moods. "Don't tell me you're upset about that Asian kid. It's none of his business. I'm just annoyed." Rome replied coldly, his eyes sliding away, his brows still drawn tight. "What's going on with you?" Zach pressed, a teasing glint in his eyes. "You're bothering me." Rome turned and bared his teeth in a threatening growl. His agitation only climbed, so Zach raised his hands, signaling him to calm down and stop asking questions. "Fine, I won't ask if you don't want me to. But seriously, is he really Master Thee's confidant? I've never seen Master Thee close to anyone." Zach blew a low whistle, his eyes sparkling with keen interest. "It's honestly fascinating. He's so young. How did you find him? He's not a kid. He's the same age as us." Rome answered curtly, folding his arms over his chest. His eyes drifted back to the Asian boy against his will. "Stop talking about him. What's there to care about? How old he is, who he knows. What does any of it have to do with you?" Zach's eyes widened, and the smile on his face stretched wider. "Of course I care. This is the guy Vince said you actually let room with you. He called me the moment he heard. You're all such gossips." Rome pressed his tongue against his cheek. His irritation eased a fraction, but his dissatisfaction only grew. "He came to help with the work. Pine assigned him as my bodyguard. What's so strange about sleeping in the same room?" Zach let out a long, obnoxious, "Oh," nodding with his arms folded as if Rome's explanation made perfect sense. Somehow, that made Rome even more annoyed. Rome decided to ignore it entirely to keep himself from getting angrier and change the subject. "What have you found out about the Wit?" The Wit was the old rival who had made Kian close himself off from everyone. Rome had once taught him a lesson and thought the matter was settled. He hadn't expected there was a deeper conspiracy behind it, one that might even threaten Master Thee's life. It was infuriating. Everywhere he turned, something was there to stoke his anger. Zach smiled as if he found something amusing but forced himself to put on a serious face to keep Rome from snapping. Rome was always like a wild dog, and today he seemed even more irritable than usual. "We've only caught some low-level minions. Let's wait a little longer. We should have results soon." Zach spoke in a relaxed tone, though to Rome it came off as particularly grating. But soon, Zach's expression shifted back to one of keen excitement. "By the way, what's that kid's name again? Mhok, right? Are you really not close to him? Vince said you let him room with you. Or is it just that you're close and he isn't?" "Shut up." Rome shoved Zach's head away. The emotions that had just started to settle surged back up. He hadn't expected his friend to be such a gossip. Vince had been gone less than 3 hours, and the news was already in Zach's ear. So annoying. Mhok, dressed in a neat school uniform and carrying a small backpack, stood before the bulletin board in the corridor. Beside him was the Arseni family's young master, also staring at the board, though his clothes looked far more casual, especially with the jacket slung over his shoulders and the tail of his shirt hanging loose. "Which classroom are you in?" Rome asked, his eyes sweeping over the notice, his brows creased. They had attended the freshman orientation ceremony in the auditorium, then had 3 or 4 free days for students to choose clubs. The school allowed students to switch clubs at any time, so everyone could find something that interested them. Mhok hadn't joined any clubs because he had to help Kian with his affairs, while Rome had chosen his own club. So during those free days, the two of them had been busy with separate things. Today was the first day of classes, and they had just realized they should check the classroom assignments. The first year was divided into 3 classrooms to make management easier for the teachers. The classes were reshuffled every year so students could get to know each other. As Kian had said, although the school's academic workload was heavy, connections and social networking mattered more. Mhok scanned the notice board, found his name, and turned to answer. "Class 3. I'm in Class 1. Why aren't we in the same class?" Rome raked his fingers through his hair, which was already messy. Mhok, standing beside him, sighed inwardly. He didn't understand why Rome was always so irritable. Rome got worked up over everything. Before meals, after meals, it didn't matter. He always seemed impatient. The only saving grace was that he never took his moods out on others. He just sulked by himself and got over it after a while. His emotional swings were like a menopausal woman's. Of course, those were just Mhok's private thoughts. He didn't voice them aloud, for fear of making Rome even more upset. "Calm down, Master Rome. The class division is random, isn't it?" Mhok consoled him in an even tone, though it sounded more like stating a fact than offering comfort. "Then why were we put in different classrooms?" Mhok looked at Rome helplessly, struggling not to sigh. Finally, he lowered his gaze, his fingers lightly brushing the messy hem of Rome's shirt. "Today is the first day of school. At least dress neatly. Is there any difference between the first day and the last day?" Rome asked impatiently. Mhok just shook his head a little, as if to say, "Let him be. It's a sign of respect for others," Mhok replied. "Or at the very least, it's for your own good." Rome turned his head and looked down at the boy who was shorter than him. Though he felt a bit uncomfortable, he still tucked his shirt into his trousers. Mhok watched with a faint smile, feeling both amused and resigned. He knew Rome simply wanted to rebel, and that it wasn't really that hard to get through to him. Rome stared at Mhok, his eyes flickering as if he wanted to say something. But in the end, he just stood there, watching time slip by while Mhok still hesitated. Finally, Mhok gave a slight nod, turned, and walked toward his classroom. Mhok pushed open the classroom door. A few students were already seated inside. When the door opened, the room fell briefly quiet. Almost everyone glanced his way, but soon their eyes drifted off, dismissing him. He walked straight to the back of the classroom and chose an empty seat against the wall. He didn't want to attract too much attention. It would only interfere with his handling of other matters and didn't suit his nature. Mhok set down his bag and turned to look at the person seated beside him. He was a thin boy wearing square-framed glasses, his long bangs covering part of his face. He held a thick book in his hands and was reading intently. Finally, someone of a normal height. Mhok considered himself to be of standard height, but among those towering classmates, he always felt shorter. Now, he felt as if he had recovered some of his dignity. "Hello." Mhok greeted easily, a faint smile on his face. "My name is Mhok. Nice to meet you." The boy startled slightly. His blue eyes lifted toward Mhok through the glasses, a trace of wariness in them. Mhok kept smiling and let the other boy study him. It felt like the first time he'd encountered a stray dog, scared and curious all at once. "My name is Lafu," the boy replied in a low voice, carrying a slight British accent. "Hello, Lafu." Mhok repeated it softly, his gaze dropping to the book in the boy's hands. He decided to try building some small connection first. Though he didn't expect to make friends like an ordinary student, as a newcomer, he at least needed someone to ask for information. "Is that book interesting?" "It looks difficult." "It's not interesting. It's actually really hard." Lafu answered lazily, a note of fatigue in his voice. He didn't seem to have been fully focused on reading even before Mhok arrived. I have to finish it today because I have to return it. You're so diligent. Classes haven't even started yet. Mhok spoke seriously. He had heard the academic workload here was punishing, but he hadn't expected someone to prepare so far in advance. Besides, if he remembered correctly, the content of that book was at least 10th grade level, not theirs. I'm a scholarship student. Oh, you must be new here, so let me explain. Lafa paused and sighed. There are only 5 scholarships given each year. The only condition for keeping it is that your grades stay in the top 10, and no single subject can fall below 70%. Mhok nodded slightly. He was roughly aware that 80% of the students at this school came from wealthy families. The remaining 20% were either followers like himself or scholarship students brought in to elevate the school's academic standing. And the 20% minority sitting here right now included both types. Mhok found it a little amusing. He was supposed to be building connections among the powerful, but on his very first day, here he was, gravitating toward the 20%. So, Lafu, you're even more impressive than I thought. The scholarship exam is difficult, isn't it? He offered the compliment earnestly, still wearing his faint smile. Inwardly, he was already thinking how useful it would be if he could draw this talented person to Arseni's side. He would need to observe Lafu's character more closely. If he proved suitable, he might be able to add another capable assistant to master these ranks. As a confidant, Mhok approved silently. The first step in building connections was finding talented people. This would be ideal. You're no less capable than me, I'd imagine. The first-year high school entrance exam here is brutal too. Most of the students were promoted from the lower grades. Our exams were different. There's no real way to compare them. Lafa blinked, then scratched his reddening cheek with his fingers, looking a little shy. It had been a long time since anyone had praised him so directly. He cleared his throat, trying to shake off the strange feeling, then turned his head and looked at Mhok seriously. Mhok was an Asian boy, slight of build, with a faint smile on his face. Though it didn't look entirely sincere, it didn't feel pressuring either. On the contrary, his words were natural and smooth. Even knowing he was being flattered, it still felt comfortable, not off-putting. Lafa sighed quietly, then finally said in a low voice, a word of warning. Don't get too close to me. He shrugged and hid behind his oversized book again. Also, try not to walk around alone. There are a lot of idiots here who don't know you're with Arseni. Mhok raised his eyebrows, not fully grasping the meaning of this warning. He also didn't understand why belonging to Arseni was something others needed to know. He had always survived on his own. There are a lot of white supremacists here, Lafu added, seeing his confusion. He dropped his voice even lower, as if afraid of being overheard, still not poking his head out from behind the book. Scholarship students have no power and aren't welcome. And those supremacists, they don't welcome Asians. You need to be careful. Chapter 10. After the morning class, Mhok opened the notes he had taken, quickly glanced through them, and then stuffed them into his backpack. Though the day's material had been taught at a brisk pace, it wasn't too difficult. After all, Kian had asked him to preview it beforehand. Where are you going next? Mhok turned and asked Lafu, who was sitting beside him. At the same time, he glanced out the window at the sky. The sun was still high overhead. Finishing school this early felt a little unnatural. To the library. Lafu's posture had relaxed, though he was only slightly friendlier than before. Can I go with you? Mhok asked with a smile. I'm new here. I'm not familiar with the school yet. He was telling the truth, of course. Although Rome often took him around the campus, most of the places Rome took him were useless, especially the fighting club. Zach had said Rome never took anyone there. If he did, it was usually to fight in the ring. Taking Mhok there just to sit and stare blankly was something Zach found utterly unbelievable. But Mhok had found it incredibly boring. What annoyed him even more were those curious looks that kept coming his way. And there was nothing he could do about it. Mhok had just tucked his notebook into his bag when he sensed someone standing in front of his desk. He raised his head, a faint smile still on his face, but his eyes had cooled. Why is there an extra yellow monkey here today? A sweet but mocking voice sounded. Slender fingers toyed with long golden hair. No wonder I've been smelling something strange all day. Mhok looked up and stayed calm. Most of these students had been promoted from the lower grades. Very few transferred in during the first year of high school, as he had. And most of those few were scholarship students or exchange students, not worth his attention. Stop it, Becky. There are probably only bamboo forests in China. There are no decent schools there. Another girl echoed her sharply, drawing a round of snickers. Mhok's dark eyes swept slowly across the group clustered around his desk, quickly assessing their identities. If the Arseni family was the kind of major power one needed to be wary of, these people were third-rate at best. No threat whatsoever, far beneath the Arseni family's stature. Today, he was finally realizing the usefulness of Kian forcing him to memorize the roster of every significant family. "I'm Thai," Mhok answered softly, his slight smile still in place, as if he were listening to a joke. He leaned back in his chair, looking relaxed, not a trace of anger in his eyes. Trained since childhood, he had long since become immune to such childish insults. The girl's brow twitched. She grew even more annoyed seeing Mhok's smile remain, carrying even a hint of indifference, as though he were watching a childish farce. She crossed her arms and turned her head away. "Thailand, Taiwan. It's just some tiny island. Thailand is not Taiwan. Taiwan is in East Asia. Thailand is in Southeast Asia." Mhok spoke in that same gentle tone, casually flipping through the timetable he had just received. "I only just noticed there's no geography class here, but I'm sure I saw it on the schedule. Or do you simply not take that class seriously? A backward country, do I need to know anything about it?" The girl's face flushed red with anger, then paled, then reddened again. "You're just some poor scholarship student who crawled here, and you dare talk back to me? You have no manners." Mhok raised his eyebrows. It seemed these people had no idea he belonged to Arseni, though he had no intention of clearing up that misunderstanding. According to etiquette, those of lower status may only speak after those of higher status have initiated the conversation. "I believe I was simply sitting here. You came to speak to me first," he answered just as easily, though his eyes went cold for a brief moment. In any case, he was Arseni's man. Even if the other party didn't know it, hearing someone from a third-rate family call Arseni's people low status was still galling. "Don't get worked up, Becky." Another girl patted her shoulder, still wearing a contemptuous smile. Talking about etiquette with someone from a country where people ride elephants to school. How could they possibly understand? The corners of Mhok's mouth lifted slightly, the lines of his face softening a fraction, but his eyes sharpened, all friendliness gone. "Bangkok is one of the most congested cities in the world. You may not know this, but that leaves elephants with nowhere to go." He spoke slowly, then let out a quiet, cold chuckle. "We haven't ridden elephants for over 100 years. I didn't realize that, in addition to geography, you hadn't managed to learn world history either." Mhok shook his head slightly, then opened his eyes wide in feigned surprise. "Those two subjects are clearly on the schedule. Are you really this careless in class? How pitiful." He stood after he finished speaking. Though he wasn't as tall as the European students, he was still taller than these girls. He picked up his backpack and dipped his head a little, almost as if in threat, though the faint smile never left his face. "If there's nothing else, I'll be going. I plan to visit the library and read a few books." Mhok's tone remained gentle, without a trace of rudeness. "You're welcome to join me. After all, it seems you have quite a few lessons to catch up on." He strode away without giving them time to react. He nudged Lafa gently, signaling him to follow, then walked swiftly out of the classroom. Lafa followed close behind, his thin frame trembling faintly. Mhok pressed his lips together. He had been enjoying himself and had forgotten that Lafu was a scholarship student. His tolerance for conflict might not match Mhok's own. Besides, Mhok had no idea what Lafu had endured before. The scene just now might have genuinely frightened him. But when Mhok reached out and patted Lafu's shoulder, Lafu raised his head and burst into laughter, laughing so hard tears nearly came. Mhok froze, suddenly confused. But he relaxed when he saw Lafu smiling so openly. "I had my doubts about whether you were really Arseni's man. But after that, it's obvious you're more than worthy of the title." Lafa spoke through his smile, a hint of teasing in his voice. "Don't make it sound like I did something strange," Mhok said with a faint smile, his calm expression returning. "But will this cause trouble for you? Then I'm relieved. At first, you didn't seem eager to talk to me. I worried it might put you in an awkward spot. I just didn't want to cause trouble. But being with you is actually fun." Lafa shrugged, his tone relaxed. "Still, you need to be careful going forward. They won't let this go easily." "Something that small won't cause me any trouble," Mhok said quietly. But in his mind, he saw Kian's serious face. As Arseni's heir, Kian not only had to attend school, but had already begun managing the family's gray business. As his confidant, Mhok's workload was only growing heavier. Lafu was silent for a moment, his expression turning serious. Honestly, if you just told them you're with Arseni, the problem would disappear. Those people aren't even half of what Arseni is. Mhok paused for a moment, but quickly recovered, the faint smile returning to his face. I'm not used to doing that, and I don't want to bother Arseni over something so trivial. You only joined Arseni recently, didn't you? Managing something like this in such a large family must be difficult. Lafu nodded and didn't press further. Mhok smiled and didn't explain. He knew that Lafu's understanding of uncomfortable was nothing like his own. It wasn't because he had just joined. It was because he had never truly belonged anywhere. In any case, be careful. These people won't give up easily. Who's going to give who trouble? A low, rough voice cut into their conversation. Mhok looked up and saw a tall figure striding toward them from the other end of the corridor, his face filled with displeasure. Rome looked even more irritated than usual. Mhok sighed softly, wondering whether Rome genuinely hated him. Every time they met, Rome was always in this foul mood. Rome walked straight up to them and wedged his tall body between Mhok and Lafu. Who's giving who trouble? What happened? And who is this? Rome fired off questions in rapid succession, his face full of impatience. No one is giving anyone trouble. And it's nothing. Mhok chose denial. Just thinking about the chaos Rome would cause if he found out gave him a headache. With Rome's impulsive nature, he would never tolerate Arseni being insulted, even if the real issue was that Mhok hadn't revealed his identity. Master Rome, what can I do for you? Do I need a reason to come find you? Rome said coldly, his mouth downturned, his eyes brimming with displeasure. Who is this? When did you two get so familiar? Isn't today the first day of class? Mhok frowned, beginning to feel that Rome was being unreasonable. He counted to 10 silently and tried to stay calm. This is Lafu. We just met today. How can you be this familiar with someone you just met? Rome's tone grew even more impatient. Mhok drew a deep breath. The smile disappeared from his face, leaving only a flat expression. He looked at Rome coolly, no longer concerned with his status. We are not that familiar, he said, emphasizing each word. Then he turned to Lafu and nodded. Let's go, Lafu. Sorry for the wait. Where are you going? Why just the two of you? Rome's voice rose, his ears flushing red with anger. Mhok sighed again, beyond counting now, and looked at Rome with resignation. I'm going to the library. Master Rome, would you like to come with me? Fine. Didn't you promise to come to the party tonight? Vince's voice cut in suddenly. He slung an arm around Rome's neck, his tone teasing and accusing. We agreed to celebrate the start of school. The room's already set up. Don't bail on me. Rome shook off Vince's arm, his face still dark. The party's tonight, isn't it? I'll go to the library first. Since when do you love reading this much, Rome? Zack strolled up slowly, a teasing smile on his face. Hey, I want to read a book. You got a problem with that? Rome said icily, then turned to Mhok. I'm going to the library. So you're coming to the party with me tonight? Mhok frowned and let out a confused huh? Rome nodded as if it were the most natural thing in the world, then turned to look at Lafu, who was still standing beside him. I'm going to the library too. You don't mind, do you? Lafu could only nod and duck nervously behind his backpack. Rome smiled with satisfaction, then looked back at Mhok. Mhok sighed, decided not to dwell on the absurdity, and headed straight for the library. Chapter 11. Rome didn't understand why he was sitting at a long table in the library with a thick book in front of him, a book he hadn't read a single word of. Thinking back, Vince had proposed a back-to-school party right after class let out. Everyone had been too busy before, especially Sater, Times, and Zack. Zack, as a top hacker, had taken on a heavy workload once school started and hadn't had any time to get together with friends. Rome had quickly agreed, but then he had frozen for a moment, a trace of worry flickering in his eyes. Yesterday, he had seen Mhok sighing in their room, looking like a small animal in a cage, bored and sad. He hadn't known what to do. Comforting people wasn't his strong suit. When he'd asked Mhok what was wrong, Mhok had just waved him off impatiently and refused to explain. Rome had felt nothing but frustration. But this time, his frustration was with himself. He felt useless. Rome believed that as the boss, he had a responsibility to keep his subordinate in good spirits, to keep Mhok from being so gloomy all the time. So when he heard Vince mention the party, he had immediately declared, "I'm taking Mhok with me." "Sure, he's yours anyway." Vince had nodded, not finding it odd at all. But Zach had narrowed his eyes and studied Rome with open suspicion. After all, Rome had never brought any of the girls he had dated to their parties. Rome had immediately wiped the smile off his face and turned to glare at Zach. He didn't know why, but he felt like Zach was staring straight through him. "Who's Mhok?" Shaq had tilted his head and pushed his glasses up. Zach had raised an eyebrow and turned to Rome with a meaningful smile. "You'll find out soon. Stop asking. Zach always talks nonsense." Rome had waved his hand impatiently, motioning for Zach to straighten up. "You'll know when you see him later, Shaq. There's nothing here but lunatics and fools. I'm too tired to explain. Vince is crazy, but I'm not stupid." Rome had shot back immediately, but Zach had only laughed harder and shook his head. "No, Rome. You're the idiot." Rome had glared at Zach, then stood up, deciding to pay no more attention to that troublemaker. "Where are you going?" Vince had asked, the only one who had understood absolutely nothing of the exchange. "To class 3. Why would you go there? Aren't we heading back to the dorm?" Rome had pressed his lips together, frowned, and then answered, "It's just back to the dormitory. Class 3 is on the way." Their classrooms lay along a long corridor. Theirs was at one end. Class 3 was at the opposite end. They were not on the same route at all. Rome knew this excuse was flimsy, but he was too lazy to explain. He had grabbed his bag and walked out quickly, leaving his friends trailing behind. He had been thinking about how to pass by Class 3 or where to intercept Mhok. It was afternoon now, and Mhok might not have gone back to the dormitory yet. He had suddenly realized how little he actually knew about Mhok. And then, just as his mind was drifting, Mhok had appeared. His slender figure was walking toward him, his head slightly lowered as he talked with a shorter boy beside him. The two had seemed to get along well. Rome had narrowed his eyes, his mind racing with guesses about who that person was. Mhok was Arseni's man. How could he let strangers get close to him? "It looks like your boy has a new friend. And they seem pretty close." Zach had teased, a sly smile on his face. "He doesn't look that short when he's with us. But next to other people, he's actually kind of tall." Vince had nodded seriously. "That kid's about the same height." Zach had draped a hand on Rome's shoulder and kept teasing. "He looks friendly, cute, and approachable, and his height is just right. Basically the dream type every girl talks about." Before anyone could say another word, Rome had already marched over and wedged himself unceremoniously between Mhok and the stranger. Close. Just right. Complete nonsense. And because of those few words from his friends, Rome was now sitting in this enormous library, a place he had never once considered visiting during an entire semester. The most ridiculous part was that he had let those pointless comments steer him here, and his friends had promptly abandoned him in the library without a trace. Except for Zach. That guy was a walking nuisance, always wearing that punchable expression, smiling like he knew some secret, when in truth he knew nothing at all. So annoying. "Master Rome." Rome flinched at the sound of his name and looked up to find Mhok's dark, bright eyes fixed on him. Those eyes were beautiful, black and glossy, like two gemstones. Unfortunately, right now they were full of resignation and mild exasperation. "If you can't focus, just go back to the dormitory and get some sleep." "Who says I can't focus? I'm here to read." Rome straightened his back and did his best to look composed. "But Master Rome has been staring at the same page for nearly 15 minutes. Rome looked down at the book in his hands and realized he had indeed stopped at that page without reading a single word. He coughed lightly and pretended to return to serious reading. Mhok pressed his lips together, turned, and whispered something to the shorter friend beside him. Rome's eyes narrowed with displeasure. He wanted to know what they were saying, but didn't dare lean close enough to hear. The brief moment stretched unbearably long. Rome was nearly ready to lunge over and pull Mhok away from that person. But then Mhok packed his things and walked toward him. His face was still calm, though it carried a trace of fatigue and resignation. "Let's go." "Go where? Why are we leaving?" Rome frowned, feeling as if he were being shooed away for no reason. "I'm reading. You have no right to chase me out." "So Master Rome is planning to stay?" Mhok raised an eyebrow and glanced at the book sitting in front of Rome. "Then continue. I'll head back first. See you at the dormitory." Rome snapped the book shut and shot to his feet. He noticed the scholarship student startle slightly, but he didn't care. "Where are you going?" "Back to the dormitory." Mhok answered evenly, gently lifting the book in his hand. I'm hungry, and I want to borrow a book to read in the room. If Master Rome wants to stay, I'll just go on ahead. I'll go too. Rome paused, then coughed, realizing he had sounded far too eager. I've finished reading too, and I'm hungry. You haven't been to any restaurant besides the cafeteria, right? I'll take you. Master Rome, aren't you going to the party with Master Vince tonight? Mhok asked, tilting his head with a note of doubt. Rome's newly recovered composure fractured again, and he frowned. It's still early. The party's not until tonight. Besides, you're coming too. Mhok seemed to decide further conversation wasn't worth the effort. He turned slightly, gesturing for Rome to lead the way. Rome immediately grabbed his bag and strode ahead. What do you want to eat? Rome's mood lifted without warning, for no other reason than that they had walked out of the library together. Mhok turned his head, as if weighing the suggestion. Rome raised his eyebrows, a pleased smile spreading across his face. The corners of Mhok's mouth lifted slightly, revealing a faint smile, and his expression relaxed considerably. Rome's heart stirred for reasons he couldn't name. Anything is fine. Rome glanced at his shorter companion. He knew Mhok meant anything is fine literally. Mhok never asked for anything and never revealed his needs. He took the book from Mhok's hands, his mind turning over thoughts he couldn't quite voice. On the surface, he simply kept the conversation going. Then let me take you to try something good. Rome brought Mhok to a fast food restaurant. Though it was fast food, the prices were anything but cheap. They each sat with a tray in front of them, burgers, fries, and sodas. Rome's tray also held a portion of fried chicken. Shouldn't we save room for the party tonight? Mhok frowned at the burger on his tray, which was nearly twice the size of any he had seen before. Then he looked at the fried chicken on Rome's tray, 2 enormous chicken cutlets. Vince's parties only have snacks and drinks. Eat up first. Rome took a bite of his fries. Is that enough for you? Do you want some fried chicken? I can share. No, thank you. Mhok refused firmly and pushed his tray back a little. Rome fought back a laugh, his eyes trembling with the effort. Finally, he couldn't help it. Seeing Mhok's expression, which looked ready to bite someone, made him crack. If you eat so little, how do you expect to grow taller? He teased. Mhok pressed his lips together, his face sour, a trace of indignation in his eyes. Perhaps you should consider whether you eat too much, instead of accusing others of eating too little. Rome looked at Mhok and felt not the slightest bit intimidated. Instead, his smile grew even brighter. He felt a deep satisfaction, even a little sweetness in his chest, like a thin thread slowly unwinding. Normally, Mhok rarely showed any emotion at all, but even though he looked annoyed now, Rome found him undeniably cute. Cute and lively, no longer that blank, expressionless Mhok. Rome laughed enough, took a bite of his fried chicken, and urged Mhok to hurry up and eat. Mhok shot him a sidelong glance. Though he was a little annoyed at being laughed at, his brows soon smoothed, and the atmosphere between them turned warm and easy. Mhok took a bite of his burger, the corner of his mouth curving up, his dark eyes flashing. But he was clever enough to hide it. It was a little annoying, but this warmth was nice. Chapter 12. The school served as a place for students to bond and offered a number of reception rooms that could be rented to host parties of any size, all of them fully equipped. Vince's party was held in one of the smaller rooms, not because of budget constraints, but because it was a private gathering with only 5 people. As Rome had said, there were only snacks and drinks at the party, no full meals. Mhok watched his master's friends. Each held a snack in one hand, a drink beside them, and a game console connected to a large screen in front of them. Everyone was playing hard. Vince lost his 3rd straight match, going down 0-3, and collapsed dramatically to the floor once again. Want a drink? Rome, sitting on the sofa beside him, turned and raised a bottle. Mhok narrowed his eyes. Though he felt his reaction was justified, he still couldn't stop himself from reminding him, Master Rome, you are not yet an adult. Under Russian law, there's no age restriction on drinking. Rome shrugged, completely unfazed by the reminder. Besides, there's no alcohol tonight anyway. Just juice. Can't drink even if I wanted to. You are not in Russia. The law here follows EU regulations. Mhok pressed on. He knew this law well because they had sent him an entire compilation of legal codes to study. Master Thee believed one had to understand the law before learning how to properly navigate around it. I know. Relax. Rome chuckled, raising the bottle for another sip without further comment. Mhok narrowed his eyes. For some reason, the way Rome drank made a simple juice bottle look like vintage wine. So, why did you invite me? He turned and asked quietly, his gaze still fixed on the chaos unfolding across the room. He sensed the person next to him tense slightly. I was worried you'd be lonely. Rome muttered, turning away and avoiding eye contact. My friends can be a little annoying. Just think of them as entertainment. Mhok blinked, a little confused, a faint smile crossing his face. He hadn't expected that answer. Though Rome could seem grumpy and hard to approach at times, he was actually a decent person, someone who noticed others and took good care of those around him. Thank you. He smiled softly, his eyes curving into crescents and catching the light. Rome turned to look at him, froze for a moment, his gray eyes widening just slightly. He couldn't seem to look away. Mhok realized he was being stared at and feigned a small cough. He gathered himself, turned his head, and pretended nothing had happened. He sat there a while longer. After Rome yawned for the third time, Mhok poked his arm lightly with a finger. Rome raised an eyebrow instead of asking, "Go back and rest. You must be worn out from today." Rome leaned closer and whispered near his ear, "These guys will probably play for hours. They pull all-nighters all the time. But there are classes tomorrow morning. And the dormitory has a curfew. We're never late, and we never miss classes. I promise." Rome replied with a smile, raising his eyebrows with a hint of provocation. Mhok narrowed his eyes. His obvious distrust made Rome sigh. Rome rested his chin on his hand, his gray eyes fixed directly on the Asian boy, his tone growing serious and steady. "Don't worry. I won't give you a reason to. I'm Arseni's bodyguard. It's impossible not to worry." Mhok answered seriously. It was his duty. He couldn't simply ignore it. "But I've never needed a bodyguard tailing me at school. The security here is already extremely tight. It's not easy for outsiders to get in or out." Rome spoke easily, entirely untroubled. "And I can take care of myself. Don't worry." Mhok couldn't help thinking back to their first meeting. With that rebellious, gangster-like attitude and a history of conflict with others, the real concern should probably be for everyone else, not for Rome. "Fine." Mhok yawned again and nodded. He had been busy all day, and his body was nearly at its limit. "I'll head back first, then." The tall boy turned his head, a fond smile on his face. "Go ahead. Get some good rest. And don't forget to lock the door. Don't come back too late. Classes tomorrow morning," Mhok said without expression, though a trace of teasing crept into his eyes, especially when he added that he would be personally responsible for waking Rome up in the morning. Rome bared his teeth in a mock grin, his expression nowhere near serious, but he couldn't help feeling a small flutter of unease. The Rome household, apart from his mother, was full of rough men. They shared a strong bond, but they rarely fussed over him like this, reminding him not to stay out too late. He wasn't entirely sure what to do with this kind of attention. Mhok, unaware of any of this, simply stood, said goodbye to Rome's three friends, opened the door, and left the room. Outside, the night was dark and the air carried a slight chill. He drew a deep breath, letting the fresh air fill his lungs, and began walking slowly back toward the dormitory. But just as he neared the front of the building, he caught sight of a dark figure tucked beneath a tree not far away. He had spent his whole life struggling and fighting. Many things had become instinct, walking silently, choosing the edge of the path rather than the open center, slipping through shadows, even minimizing his presence. These habits told him the person under the tree hadn't spotted him yet. Mhok narrowed his eyes. His hand drifted quietly to the balisong knife at his waist, gripping it firmly. Combat instinct made him sharper than usual. He gave his wrist a gentle twist, exposing the blade. His body tensed. He moved forward in slow, measured steps, his focus locked on both his sight and the cold metal in his hand. But when he drew close enough to see the figure clearly, Mhok stopped cold. He lowered his head for a moment, thinking. Then he folded the knife, hiding the sharp edge, though he didn't put it away. He kept it in his hand, stayed alert, and put a faint smile on his face. "Hi, Lafu." Lafu jolted. His body shuddered violently, and he spun around. Mhok approached slowly, stepping into the light so the other boy could see his searching gaze, so there would be no mistaking his scrutiny. "Mhok, why are you so quiet? You scared me half to death." Lafu patted his chest, his hands moving in slow rhythm. His hair stood on end, a cold shiver running through him despite the still air. Mhok studied him calmly, that faint smile still on his face. When Lafa looked up and met his eyes, Mhok simply smiled a little wider and asked in an easy tone, "What are you doing out here?" "You didn't notice me, actually," he added, his voice as relaxed as if nothing had happened, though his hand still gripped the balisong knife tightly. "But seriously, what are you doing here this late?" Lafa didn't answer right away. He looked around, making absolutely sure no one else was nearby. Then he whispered, "I saw Becky and her gang sneaking around near your room. When you went back to the dormitory earlier, I spotted them in the library too. After they figured out you weren't in the room, they walked over to this building together. I was afraid they were planning something, so I followed them to see." Hearing the familiar name, Mhok raised his eyebrows. It took him a moment to place who Becky even was, the blonde girl who had given him trouble during the day. There had been a few others around her, boys and girls, but he hadn't found them interesting enough to pay close attention. "You followed them?" He raised his voice a little. He didn't mean to sound dismissive, but he honestly didn't think Lafu had the skills to tail anyone. "I was just worried. I don't know what else they might try." "You humiliated them in front of everyone today." Lafu grumbled quietly, his face set. Mhok had to raise his hands to signal him to calm down. "Thank you, but I'm more worried about them hurting you. Please don't do this again." Mhok softened his voice. Seeing that Lafu was about to protest, he decided to put the knife away. He took Lafu by the shoulders, turned him in the other direction, and steered him toward the dormitory. "Maybe I'm being too sensitive." When the door closed, Sater and Zach exchanged a quiet look. Then Zach reached over quickly and cut the music. Vince opened his mouth to complain, but one glance at his friends' serious faces made him shut it immediately. "What's wrong?" Rome frowned, his body tensing without thought. To outsiders, they were a pack of second sons, noticeable but never taken seriously, just rich kids with no real influence, living exactly as they pleased. They were happy to be seen that way. They even made a point of letting people see exactly what they wanted to see. Only they themselves knew there was far more to the bond between the four of them than anyone guessed. Zach pushed his glasses up slightly and spoke in a serious tone. "I got a result on that IP address you asked me to trace earlier. The year before, the only friend Kian had ever trusted had betrayed him, trying to guide him into enemy hands, even selling off certain pieces of information. Though that information had been minor and caused no real damage to Kian or the Arseni family, the word betrayal could never be canceled out by harmless. Rome had asked a tech-savvy friend to help track down the traitor, determined to root out anyone who harbored ill intentions toward the Arseni family. They had started from the people who had been in contact with the traitor and traced outward, step by step. Our school's security system is so tight, the signal is tough to track consistently. It cuts in and out, but I've managed to pin down a rough location." Zach spun his laptop toward Rome. A map of the school filled the screen, a red dot blinking steadily over one of the buildings. Gray eyes narrowed, boring into the screen as if trying to pierce straight through it. The map zoomed in. The red dot pulsed on the left side of the teaching building. "Class 3, Rome murmured. Though the building had several floors, the classroom layout was identical on each one. The rooms on the left side all belonged to Class 3. He didn't know which floor yet, but at least they had a direction. Zach swiped the screen. The red dot jumped to the library. Another swipe, and it returned to the restaurant building where they sat right now. The latest signal was captured 5 minutes ago. It's closer than we thought." Zach crossed his arms, his voice carrying a note of doubt. "Rome, you went to the library this afternoon, didn't you? Did you see anyone suspicious? Isn't the scope still too broad? The whole class went to the library this afternoon, and then came to the restaurant for dinner this evening. That clue is way too vague." Vince frowned, feeling the matter growing more tangled by the moment. But Rome's face had darkened as he listened. A sharp light flickered through his eyes. "No, it might not be that difficult." Rome dropped his voice. His tone was threaded with unease and confusion. He told himself it could still be a coincidence, that he might be reading too much into things. The suspicion taking shape in his mind sounded absurd and unreal. Or maybe he just hoped it wasn't true. "Rome, what are you thinking?" Vince couldn't hold back the question. Rome lifted his head and looked at his friends in silence. Seeing the worry in their eyes, he simply smiled softly, as if nothing troubled him at all. "I'm not sure yet. We may need to dig further." Rome patted his friend on the shoulder, then turned to Zach with a serious look. Keep tracking. Don't worry, I'll handle the rest. Chapter 13. Mhok sighed deeply. He didn't want to count how many times this had happened. He only knew that every sigh shortened his lifespan by a year. If this kept up, he would probably have only a few hours left to live. He pressed his lips together and glanced at the person sprawled on the bed across the room. Though that tall body was lounging against the mattress, those sharp gray eyes were locked on him, full of threat and pressure, harder to endure than ordinary suspicion. Mhok twirled his pen a few times, then set it down. He spun his chair to face the other party directly and decided, with all solemnity, to address his young master before his own irritation grew any worse. Master Rome, is there something I can do for you? Rome flinched at the sudden direct stare, then tried to cover it with a cough. The attempt was stiff and utterly artless. He simply crossed his arms, fixed Mhok with a severe look, and pressed his lips together, clearly not about to let him slip away again. The current situation was truly maddening. Rome hesitated, frowning as if searching for words. Then his gaze swung back, carrying a shadow of gloom, deeply suspicious. Rome was always blunt. This uneasy expression was rare. If you have something to say, just say it. I was just watching you like I always do, trying to find your weaknesses. Rome was evasive, his eyes shifting. It was irritating. Are you feeling guilty? Can't you even handle being looked at? It's not guilt. It's annoyance. Mhok's face was blank. He felt no need to soften his words. The Russian gangster collapsed into his pillow, wailing about Mhok's coldness and cruelty, looking thoroughly heartbroken. Mhok watched icily, without a shred of sympathy. Seeing that the other was still complaining to his pillow, he decided to ignore him entirely and turned back to his book. Rome finally stopped grumbling when he heard the pages turning. He stole a glance at the quiet reader. After hesitating a moment longer, he asked, "Can I ask you something?" Mhok sighed again. He closed his book, crossed his arms, turned, and faced him, one eyebrow slightly raised, his expression still calm. Rome opened his mouth, then closed it. He stayed silent for a full 5 seconds, until Mhok was nearly out of patience, before continuing. "Do you have any family?" Mhok paused. The question caught him off guard. His brow furrowed slightly, but it was no secret. No. No brothers or sisters at all. Maybe someone lost a long time ago, or a close friend from childhood. Rome looked tangled up in his own thoughts and pressed on. Or some hidden lover. An old flame? Anyone. Mhok's face grew colder. A sharp glint flashed through his eyes, enough to make anyone shrink back. Rome sensed the dangerous shift and quickly raised his hands in appeasement, realizing he might have genuinely crossed a line. "Sorry, I didn't mean to pry that deep." His tone softened. His expression fell, and he buried his head in the pillow. Seeing this, Mhok relented a little. He lowered his eyes and steadied his mood. The truth was, the question wasn't unaskable. He simply didn't want to answer it. "Why does Master Rome want to know this?" he asked, his voice even, his brow relaxing slightly. Rome's face was buried in the pillow, so he couldn't see, but his heart was still churning with unease. Rome hesitated, his mind a mess. After a silence, he finally said, "I just wanted to find your weakness." He paused, then raked a hand through his hair, looking irritated. He seemed to realize how ridiculous it sounded, but had no idea how to go on. Mhok crossed his arms and narrowed his eyes, as if trying to read whatever pointless thoughts were running through the other's head. "Have you been watching too many TV dramas with Master Thee? Who would watch that stuff?" Rome's head shot up from the pillow, baring his teeth in indignation. "That's a relief." Mhok nodded, genuinely so. "Then where did you get this idea?" Rome pressed his lips together, looking as though he wanted to speak, but couldn't bring himself to. After waiting a while longer, Mhok finally lost his patience and decided to end the strange conversation. "There is no hidden story. I'm not in pain about it anymore. It's not something to be proud of, but it's not something I can't talk about either." Mhok chose his answer carefully. "I have no family and no childhood friends. If you're worried my weaknesses would be things like that, being threatened through family or forced into betrayal, you can rest easy. That will never happen." His tone was calm, without any trace of persuasion, as if he were merely stating an emotionless fact. Yet, somehow, those words gradually quieted Rome's restless heart. "I was just asking casually." Rome straightened up and spoke lightly, a complete shift from his earlier anxiety. Mhok saw that his young master seemed fine again and returned his focus to the book in his hands. Rome hugged his pillow and rocked slowly, his thoughts still tangled. Finally, after hesitating a long while, he asked, "Did you notice anyone suspicious on your way back from the party last night? Master Rome, were you attacked? Or is someone following you?" Mhok dropped his pen immediately, frowning, alarm rising in his chest. He had been negligent. He had come back early because the school felt safe, and because he still wasn't used to protecting someone else. If something had happened to Rome, even if Master Thee said he had come here as a student and didn't need to worry, Mhok would still feel the weight of that failure. He had been too careless. He had failed in his duty. No, nothing happened. Rome denied it, pressing his lips together. Finally, he shifted topics. Last year, Pioness information was stolen and sold. You're new here, and I'm worried you might get targeted too. Master Thee. Mhok was even more confused. The Master Thee he knew was cautious to the point of paranoia, unfriendly and hard to approach. It had taken Mhok himself a long time just to earn Master Thee's basic approval. He didn't seem like someone easily fooled. It's complicated. Just be careful. I don't know who bought the information or who they sold it to. Rome chose to warn him, but didn't elaborate. Mhok understood and didn't press. Some things were simply too personal to discuss. I understand. Mhok nodded. If I find anyone suspicious, I'll notify you immediately. Good. Please do. Mhok rose early, as always. After his daily fitness training, he returned to the room, glanced at the young master still in bed, then slipped into the bathroom. He washed up, dressed neatly, and stopped beside the bed. Master Rome, it's time to get up. He kept his voice low, reaching out to gently shake the person still buried in blankets. Any later, and you'll be late. Good morning. Rome poked his head out from the bedding, his face damp with sweat, his hair a mess. Mhok frowned slightly and, without thinking, touched Rome's forehead with the back of his hand. Normal temperature. No sign of fever. The gray eyes, though tired, were still bright. Mhok felt relieved. Good morning. I'll go get breakfast ready. Take a shower once you're up. You're soaked. You're going to get breakfast? Rome asked without moving, his tone full of expectation. When Mhok nodded, he seemed genuinely pleased. Then bring me something too. Bring it back to the room. Mhok raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. After all, he was the other's assistant, and bringing breakfast was hardly a burden. He left the room and headed to the nearby cafeteria. He picked up a tray, chose his food, and sat in a quiet corner. His eyes swept the room slowly. When he spotted a certain scholarship student yawning, he raised a hand in greeting. You're up early. Lafu rubbed his eyes and set his tray down. I'm so lazy. I'm exhausted. Can a scholarship student really afford to call himself lazy? Mhok asked with a smile, though his gaze continued its slow circuit of the room. Rome's words from the night before still echoed in his mind. Mhok had never protected anyone. All his life, he had only ever looked after himself. The sudden awareness that danger might be near, and that he might not see it, left him unsettled. Scholarship students are human too. We eat, sleep, laze around. We're not robots. Lafu grumbled, biting into his sandwich. Mhok chuckled, then suddenly went still. His eyes had met someone else's. A tall man, perhaps only slightly taller than himself, with sharp features and Latin lines. Dark brown hair swept casually to one side, blue eyes studying him in silence. Mhok had caught his gaze by accident, but the stranger stared back directly, as if making it clear it was no accident at all. After a moment, the strange man slowly looked away, as if nothing had happened. Lafu noticed his friend's sudden silence and followed his gaze. Do you know Lucio? Who? Mhok asked, resuming his breakfast as if what had just happened wasn't worth worrying about. Lucio Vladio, son of a prominent Italian Mafia family. Lafu explained, a trace of surprise on his face. He's been your boss's sworn enemy since the first day of school. Mhok blinked, then seemed to recall something. He had read that name in Rome's background file, but Rome had never mentioned him, so he had nearly forgotten. I've heard the name, but this is the first time I've seen him in person. He's in our class. Lafu spoke flatly, sympathy for his friend creeping in. But he sits in the front row, always surrounded by people. It's not surprising you never got a clear look at him. Mhok smiled faintly and didn't respond. He was used to sorting people into categories. Since he had never seen Lucio and Lucio had never bothered him, Mhok had filed him under harmless Unimportant. No need to remember. Are they really sworn enemies? The Vladio family and the Arseni family have never been openly hostile. They've never even had a public quarrel. Mhok asked casually. In his view, though Rome was a little impulsive, he wasn't unreasonable. And this Lucio looked elegant and composed, hardly the type to start fights unprovoked. True, they've never fought in public. Lafa frowned, as if searching his memory. But the atmosphere when they're near each other is genuinely awful. Like two tigers can't share one mountain. Mhok nodded quietly and went back to his breakfast, setting aside his questions about the Italian gangster for now. They were in the same class, but there was little chance for real interaction. After all, he belonged to the Arseni family. He would probably be disliked on sight. Besides, he had no desire to tangle with that kind of heavyweight. Just being Asian was troublesome enough. Chapter 14. He thought he had no reason to get to know the Italian gangster, but within 2 hours, he was sitting across from him. Mhok looked down at the small slip in his hand and recalled the scene of drawing lots just moments ago. He couldn't help but sigh again. The teacher had asked them to complete the assignment in pairs. After watching nearly every student choose their friends as partners, the female teacher had smiled, produced a box of lots, and shaken it excitedly, announcing this was to bring the whole class closer in the new school year. He unfolded the slip in his hand and found the number 7 written in the middle. He turned toward the scholarship student beside him and saw a 12 on the other's note. He couldn't help feeling a pang of regret. It was only a few days into the school year, and he had barely spoken to anyone. The thought of teaming up with a stranger and starting a whole new conversation made him feel sluggish. The teacher gave them free time in class to discuss and choose the theme of their presentation. Mhok walked toward a girl who looked friendly, lifting the corners of his mouth into a gentle smile. Though it was purely politeness, the other's face instantly flushed, her cheeks turning a lovely pink. She turned eagerly to ask other students. But before Mhok could react, a tall figure had already walked over. Blue Eyes glanced at the note in his hand. Then the stranger handed him his own slip. Mhok narrowed his eyes and stared expressionlessly at the number 7 on the note. He couldn't suppress a flicker of irritation. He hadn't expected his life to intersect with people like this so frequently. In the end, they sat at the same table, and the two young men faced each other in silence. Hi, I'm Lucio. The young Italian gangster seemed to lose his patience first, introducing himself with a faint smile. Mhok took in the friendly attitude and nodded slightly. Compared to the Russian gangster, this Italian one seemed far more approachable. I am Mhok. This time, it was Lucio who paused. His smile brightened further, and his previously calm eyes seemed to ripple. He responded in a low voice, his tone unreadable. So you're the one from the Arseni family everyone's been talking about. I didn't realize we were in the same class. Mhok faced this with a faint smile, his eyes steady and unflustered. He had expected the reaction to be less than friendly, but a trace of doubt lingered. Lucio obviously despised Rome, yet he seemed to have only just discovered that Mhok belonged to Arseni. You didn't know? Mhok asked. If you're uncomfortable with this, I can find someone else to switch groups. To his surprise, Lucio showed no displeasure at all. He simply waved a hand in an easy manner. It's fine. I'm just a little surprised. Besides, how would I have known? You're not wearing the Arseni badge. Mhok was silent for a moment. He had, in fact, noticed some students wearing their family emblems on their chests. Each family sent its confidants to study at the school so they could serve the family in the future. The emblem acted as a mark of identity, warning others not to provoke them lightly. Mhok had chosen to keep his badge in a drawer. It made blending into the crowd easier and suited his way of life. No wonder those blonde girls had dared to approach him without any regard for the Arseni name. His gaze rested briefly on the back of a thin scholarship student not far away, then returned to his partner before him. I heard your father, Vladio, despises the Arseni family. I'm Lucio. We're classmates here. I'm not that petty. The other answered impatiently, then fixed him with a serious look. It's important you understand this clearly. I don't hate the Arseni family. There's nothing wrong between Vladio and Arseni. Then Rome. I just hate Rome's face, Lucio continued, as if discussing something perfectly ordinary. Mhok frowned. He knew his young master had a difficult personality, but he had never imagined it would get him into trouble with the son of an Italian Mafia family. Did something happen between you two? No. We've barely exchanged a word, and we've never fought. The tall young man answered without expression, crossing his arms over his chest, looking entirely relaxed. Mhok blinked, feeling the conversation grow harder and harder to follow. Part of him wanted to pretend he hadn't heard any of this about the two Mafia sons, but another part worried it might affect the Arseni family's interests. At the very least, if this really was nothing more than a pointless personal grudge, he could cross a suspect off his list. What happened then? I heard things between you and Rome were tense. I just don't like him, Lucio said impatiently. Seeing Mhok's lingering confusion, he sighed. I just don't like his face. Understand? His face is annoying. And he always acts like he's above everyone. Mhok fell silent for a moment, quietly averting his gaze. He felt he ought to say a few words in his young master's defense. The problem was, he actually agreed with Lucio's assessment and couldn't find any solid ground to refute it. Rome was, in truth, a bit annoying. Even more than a bit. What do you think about today's assignment? So you can't win the argument, and you're changing the subject? Lucio nodded with a smile. I'd rather hear your thoughts first. Go ahead. The son of the Italian Mafia leaned back, crossed his legs, and folded his hands loosely across his chest, looking down, unintentionally radiating a sense of pressure, as if they were not discussing a high school assignment, but a multi-million-dollar deal. The atmosphere was exactly like being with Rome, even though he claimed to hate Rome. Mhok was deeply familiar with this feeling. He simply leaned forward a little, lifted a faint smile at the corner of his mouth, and spoke with steady conviction. My idea is this. They spent a long time exchanging opinions before finally reaching a consensus. By the end of class, they had completed the framework of the entire assignment, then parted ways to eat with their respective friends. Do you want to come work for me? Lucio asked before they separated, his expression far too serious to be a joke. You're excellent. I like you. Come work for me. I can guarantee your salary, or I can go over the benefits in detail. It's a pity. If my young master hadn't hired me first, I might have accepted. Mhok offered a polite smile and used careful words to decline the invitation, his attitude humble and courteous, enough not to embarrass the other party, yet firm enough to maintain distance. This only made Lucio more regretful. What a shame, he said lightly, then stood. But you're always welcome. If you ever get tired of Rome, just come to me. Even if the Arseni family objects, I'll find a way to sort it out. Mhok kept his smile and watched Lucio rise and reunite with his friends. Then he stood slowly himself, spotting Lafu still busy with his own partner. Mhok packed his things, draped his jacket over his arm, and stood waiting not far away. His eyes remained fixed on the scholarship student, quietly observing. Have you been waiting long? Lafu hurried over and waved a greeting. Mhok adjusted his expression just slightly, the corners of his mouth lifting, though his eyes seemed a little distant, as if veiled by a thin mist. But in the span of a blink, the mist vanished without a trace. Mhok shook his head, indicating he hadn't waited long, then walked out of the classroom. Only a few students remained in the wide corridor now. Most had already gone to the cafeteria. The two had taken only a few steps when a tall blonde girl suddenly strode in front of them, followed by several familiar faces, clearly the same group from the earlier conflict. Mhok raised his eyebrows. Before he could react, a bucket of cold water was thrown over him. His body was instantly drenched, water streaming from head to toe. He managed to shove Lafu aside in time, sparing him from the same fate. Disgusting. That smell these Asians have. Becky and her friends giggled, completely ignoring the startled looks from those nearby. Mhok frowned and lowered his head to sniff the water on his hands. The pungent odor told him it was probably used laundry water. You've gone too far, Lafu said, his voice low, his fists clenched, clearly furious. What's wrong? I just want this Asian to know his place. He was hanging all over Rome a few days ago, and now today he's cozying up to Lucio. Becky spoke sharply, a scornful curve at the corner of her mouth. Mhok sighed. From the corner of his eye, he saw Lafu about to step forward and argue, so he quickly raised a hand to stop him. He swept his wet hair back, water droplets glittering in the sunlight as they traced over his skin, which was flushed faintly red from the cold. His soaked white uniform clung to his body, vaguely outlining the solid lines of his muscles. His gaze swept over them sharply. A sense of depth lingered in his dark pupils, as if they could swallow a person whole. The eyes that had once been ridiculed now seemed especially piercing, enough to make anyone feel a chill. Satisfied? Mhok asked evenly, not a trace of emotion in his voice. He straightened to his full height, nearly overwhelming the girl with the difference. You? I. Becky trembled. Suddenly, the person in front of her seemed impossibly tall, impossible to resist. Are you jealous that I'm close to them? Or are you jealous that you don't have the ability to get close to them yourself? Mhok pressed on calmly, stepping closer with each word. The sharp smell from the water made him deeply uncomfortable, and a trace of genuine irritation surfaced on his usually composed face. Becky's hand went slack, and the bucket clattered to the ground. Her legs shook as she tried to step back, but found she couldn't move. Mhok looked at her, sighed, and let the threatening expression fall away. After all, she was just a jealous rich girl. Mhok met her eyes and gently pushed the wet strands of hair that had fallen across his forehead behind his ear. The motion was soft, almost delicate. His fingers brushed her forehead, registering her body heat. His eyes never left hers, calm as still water. Don't trouble yourself over those things. You're beautiful. You come from a good family. There are so many possibilities in life. He paused, the corner of his mouth lifting, a faint smile flickering in his eyes. But if you really have fallen for those two willful wolves, then work for it. Still, those two wolves can't be tamed by tearing others down. So make a better plan. Mhok ended the conversation there. He bent down, picked up the empty bucket from the floor, and pressed it back into Becky's hands, telling her to clean up after herself when she was done playing. Then he waved for Lafu to follow. He didn't forget to ask a custodian for help mopping up the water staining the floor. What should we do now? Lafu asked, looking at the soaking wet Mhok. The Asian boy was still giving off a damp, pungent smell. Clearly, he couldn't go to the cafeteria like this. I'm going back to the room to shower and change. Please buy me some lunch and bring it to my room. Mhok's voice was trembling. He was obviously freezing. Each gust of cold wind pressed the wet clothes tighter against his body. He had to wrap his arms around himself, his shivering so violent he could barely hold onto his jacket. He had just stepped out of the teaching building and was telling Lafu he could head back to the room when a tall, dark shadow suddenly fell over him. Mhok looked up. It was his young master. Rome stared down at him coldly, and Mhok couldn't fathom why the other was here, or why Rome looked so blindingly furious. Mhok let out a long sigh, his body still shaking. Why must I deal with this mad dog right now? Chapter 15. Rome gripped his wrist tightly and led him back to the room. The veins on his thick hands stood out from the force. His stern face was clenched, teeth gritted, a rare sight. His jaw was locked, and his eyes blazed with anger. His emotions were so fierce that no one would dare approach. Mhok looked down at his firmly held hand, then used his free arm to wrap the jacket tighter around himself, feeling the chill of the cold wind against his skin. Rome's jacket was far larger than his own, the sleeves hanging past his wrists, making it look a little cumbersome. But it made him feel warm. At least, even though his skin was still cold, his heart was warm. Rome pushed him into the room. The heater had been switched on, and the air was no longer unbearably cold. Mhok took off the jacket and caught the damp smell clinging to his own clothes. A pang of guilt struck him. He had soiled the other's things. I'm sorry. Your jacket is dirty now. I'll wash it for you later. Forget the jacket. Go take a shower first. Rome cut him off impatiently, urging him in a low voice to strip and wash, waving a hand to signal him to hand over his clothes so he could take them to be cleaned. Mhok shook his head a little, somewhat unhappy with the other's tone. But given the situation, he said nothing. He obediently returned the jacket to its owner and began unbuttoning his school uniform. Wait! Rome suddenly shouted and lunged forward, grabbing his hand. By then, Mhok had already undone the second button. Mhok raised his head and stared at him in confusion, at a loss for what was wrong. Rome's cheeks were red. Though his expression remained dark, he was visibly flustered. The gangster turned his head away but kept a tight hold on his hand, his eyes darting around. His voice came out raised, but his face was averted. Only his ears were crimson, nearly bleeding color. Why are you undressing here? Go undress in the bathroom. But my clothes are filthy. If I take them off in the bathroom, I'll have to walk back out naked. Mhok explained evenly, feeling both disgusted and irritated. His body was starting to tremble again from the cold. The heating in the room seemed completely useless. "You'll catch a cold," Rome barked, which only baffled Mhok more. The tall figure looked deeply unsettled. Seeing Mhok's bewildered face, Rome seemed to crumble further. In the end, he stopped talking entirely. He seized Mhok's shoulders, spun him around, and pushed him straight into the bathroom. Fortunately, the dormitory provided hot water as a standard benefit. Mhok breathed a sigh of relief as the warm water streamed down from above. His tense shoulders and arms gradually loosened. His gaze fell to his hands. If this had been before, he would have noticed the girl lying in ambush. He was certain he could have dodged it. A bucket of water was nothing to him. His entire life had been lived in vigilance. He hadn't even dared to fully relax in his sleep. But this time, he had been careless. He had let them get close enough to hurt him. Mhok clenched his fists tight, then released them. His body had been wound taut from the moment the water hit him, his instincts nearly drawing his knife to strike back. Too lax. His life had grown too comfortable. Though he silently berated himself for his negligence, the corners of his mouth lifted and his eyes softened. It wasn't good. It was even dangerous. But he felt happy. Mhok finished his shower and made certain there was no lingering odor on his skin before stepping out of the bathroom. He had been shoved in so abruptly that he hadn't brought a change of clothes. He could only emerge wrapped in a bath towel. He looked around. The spacious room was empty. He guessed Rome had probably gone out to meet his friends, so he walked over and changed into clean clothes. Deciding he was too lazy to go out again, he chose a pair of loose pants and an oversized t-shirt and planned to lie down and rest to settle his frayed nerves. Lafa would definitely bring him food, anyway. Once dressed, Mhok grabbed a small towel and draped it over his head. His black hair was still wet, but he was too tired to care. He headed straight for the balcony. The balcony was small, barely large enough for one person, but the fresh air and cool breeze made him feel at ease. Autumn was coming, and the weather was turning noticeably colder. Even with the afternoon sun, the chill still bit at the skin. Though Mhok had just finished a hot shower, his body still shivered faintly, as if the cold water had seeped all the way into his bones. He frowned, thinking of the coming winter, and felt even more irritated. As someone who despised the cold, all he could do was silently accept reality. A knock came at the door. Mhok assumed it was Lafu delivering food, so he called out for him to come in and kept closing the window. But before he could pull it shut, a large hand reached out from beside him and slid the window closed in one quick motion. "Why are you opening the window? What if you catch a cold?" Rome's voice was gruff. Mhok turned and looked at him with mild confusion. His jaw was still tight. He was clearly still furious. Rome's eyes swept him from head to toe, frowning with dissatisfaction. "And why haven't you dried your hair? You're wearing such thin clothes. Aren't you cold? What if you get sick? Just how tough do you think you are?" Mhok blinked, confused, privately wondering when this gangster young master had turned into such a nag. But the corners of his mouth rose unconsciously into a gentle smile. He had always taken care of himself. Having someone suddenly fuss and worry over him like this, it didn't feel bad at all. Rome pulled him back into the room, pressed his shoulders down to make him sit in a chair, then produced a thick wool blanket and draped it around him. He pressed a steaming cup of pale white liquid into his hands, along with a large paper bag. "You haven't eaten yet, right? Here, eat." Once he had said this, Rome picked up the towel resting on Mhok's head and began gently drying his thick hair, his movements soft and careful, as if afraid of hurting him. Mhok stole a glance at the brusque guy, but felt not the slightest urge to hit him. He raised the hot drink and took a sip. The warm milk carried a faint sweet fragrance. It was like swallowing a ball of warmth. The heat spread instantly through his body, and the trembling slowly subsided. By the time Mhok finished the milk, Rome had just finished drying his hair. Though his short hair was still a little messy, it was nearly dry. Rome's slender fingers combed through it gently, his touch completely at odds with his usual irritable image, especially given that his mood had clearly not yet settled. Rome only let go after he was sure the hair was done. Mhok thanked him and walked to the table. He opened the paper bag for a closer look. Inside was a large, fragrant burger with 2 thick patties and a generous slice of cheese, along with fries and a soda. Mhok took a bite of the burger, and the aroma made him suddenly aware of how hungry he was. At the same time, Rome dragged over a chair and sat heavily opposite him, staring with those gray eyes, radiating pressure. How do you feel? Does anything hurt? Rome's voice was low. He looked Mhok over, scanning carefully from head to toe. It doesn't hurt. I was just a little cold. Mhok answered, his hands tightening the blanket around his shoulders without thinking. I'm not used to winter. I didn't expect even cold water and cold air would feel so unbearable. Now tell me what happened. Rome's tone grew heavier, his voice low and slow, as if he were straining to hold his emotions in check. Mhok hesitated, thinking over how to answer. He had no desire to defend the girl, but he knew Rome wouldn't let this go easily. This concerned not only him, but also the Arseni family's reputation. Paired with Rome's current mood, the matter could easily escalate. He didn't want to cause trouble, even if the other party came from just a third-rate family. It was only the girl's impulsive act, and Mhok himself wasn't injured. He saw no need to make it a large affair. But if things did grow more serious, he wouldn't hesitate to strike back, even without the Arseni family's aid. It was just a misunderstanding, a minor accident. Mhok answered as he lowered his head for another bite of his burger, his tone indifferent, as if the incident wasn't worth mentioning. I was careless. It's no big deal. Rome, however, did not seem convinced. Or rather, he was unwilling to let it go. Then let me rephrase the question. Rome's voice dropped. His eyes were sharp and cold, nothing like his usual irritable self. Who did it? Mhok blinked, sensing the atmosphere grow even tenser than before. He ducked his head and kept eating, hoping to avoid the question. But Rome plainly had no intention of letting him slip away. A large hand reached out and grasped his wrist with gentle firmness. In a low, grave voice, Rome repeated, Mhok, tell me, who did it? Just consider it my own carelessness. Mhok forced a smile, inwardly scrambling for a way to make this disappear. I've been too relaxed lately. That's why I slipped. It's better to learn the lesson this way. He looked up at Rome, his eyes softening without his willing it, the corners curving slightly. He had to admit, Rome's presence made him feel safe. It had even made him drop his guard. But this feeling made him happy, rather than resistant. You were hurt. What if he gets sick? Rome frowned. Though his tone remained dissatisfied, his emotions seemed to ease a fraction. You're my responsibility. I have to protect you. At least now you know another one of my weaknesses. Mhok smiled offhandedly, trying to lighten the mood. I don't like the cold. I hate winter. Is that a weakness you've managed to find? Is this really the time for that? Rome raised his voice, but Mhok couldn't hold back his laugh. The clear sound echoed through the room, his eyes curving into crescents, as if the very air trembled for a moment. That laughter shook something in Rome's heart, too. After a few breaths of laughter, Mhok suddenly registered his loss of composure. He quickly covered his mouth and pulled back his usual calm. He coughed a few times, and the awkward atmosphere dissipated. Rome turned his face away, his ears unmistakably red, his hands clasped tight across his chest, as if struggling to keep something in. Being splashed with water isn't a big deal. Mhok's voice softened, his eyes gentler than usual. I'm just a follower, and I'm not injured. There's no need to make a fuss. You should know the Arseni family never allows anyone to bully their people. Rome turned back, a trace of displeasure still in his eyes. No matter who you are, you're mine. No one is allowed to touch you. Mhok went still. Those words made his mind go blank for a second. Something stirred inside his chest. He bit his lower lip unconsciously, feeling a strange, unfamiliar flutter. Rome didn't notice his reaction. His brows were still drawn, his eyes full of tangled emotions. If something's wrong, just tell me. I'm willing to help you. You said you would never betray me, and I won't betray you, either. Mhok was stunned, his eyes widening. His thoughts seemed to catch, but a warmth spread through his heart, like drinking a cup of hot chocolate in the dead of winter. Warm and sweet, and enough to wipe away his hatred of the cold. He loved hot chocolate, even though he rarely had the chance to drink it. It was one of the few sweet things in his memories of blood and sweat and tears. And right now, Rome gave him that exact same feeling. Mhok lowered his head and let himself relax completely for just this moment. It felt wonderful, even if it wasn't safe. I've already handled it. There shouldn't be any more trouble. He stuffed the last bite of burger into his mouth and chewed with satisfaction. She's a girl. If you get involved, it'll only hurt your image. Let it go. I'll be more careful next time. Man or woman, everyone takes responsibility for their mistakes. Rome frowned. Though his mood had settled a little, he was still unhappy. And this isn't something you should have to be careful about. They had no right to hurt you in the first place. Mhok smiled faintly. Rome was always like this. He seemed irritable and easily provoked, but in truth, he valued his companions and a sense of fairness above everything. He never hurt anyone without cause. Of course, striking back after being provoked was another matter entirely. Russian gangs never suffered losses, and their revenge was never simply tit for tat. You're too soft-hearted, Rome muttered, picking up the dessert he had bought and handing it to Mhok. Even if she's a girl, you can't forgive that easily. Don't be careless. And why aren't you wearing something thicker on such a cold day? How can you let yourself freeze like this? Rome kept fussing, his tone irritable, as if searching for an outlet to vent. Mhok listened while drinking water, though he barely absorbed a word, looking rather lazy. In truth, he was a little annoyed. But for some reason, though Rome's nagging usually grated on him, today he didn't feel annoyed at all. He waited for Rome to pause for breath, then handed him the cup of water, urging him to drink and cut off the stream of chatter. Then he said quietly, "I'm sorry. I made you worry. I won't let it happen again. If it's possible not to." He added the words in his mind. He understood that as a bodyguard and confidant, causing others worry was sometimes unavoidable. But he had realized, now, that there was someone who worried about him, who grew anxious over his troubles. His life no longer belonged to him alone. In his whole life, he had never been cared for and fussed over like this. Even in a master-servant relationship, this feeling was far better than being alone. Rome froze for a moment, his lips pressing together. Mhok saw his ears turn red again, but Rome quickly averted his face and ended the conversation. The two fell into silence. Rome simply told him to rest well and remember to keep warm. Mhok nodded, offered no argument, got up to wash, and then slipped beneath the blankets. Rome made sure he was wrapped snugly, picked up his room card, and left. The moment the lock clicked behind him, his face darkened, and his simmering emotions boiled over again. He called a friend and said tersely that he needed help. Then he strode away. Chapter 16. Rome opened the door of his friend's room and walked in. Besides Zach, the room's owner, the others were already there. Though each had his own room, and none of those rooms were adjacent, they had all gathered here. The moment Rome called Zach, the other friends must have pricked up their ears and spread the word immediately. That was why they had assembled so fast. They were friends, and each was the second son in his family, none of them playing the crucial role of future family leader. Yet some matters were still secrets, things outsiders could never know. Even among themselves, they kept a proper distance on such things. Some things remained hidden. After class the day before, Rome had deliberately slowed his pace, hoping Mhok would run into him in the corridor like last time. But even when he was nearly out of the building, Mhok still hadn't come down. Rome had no choice but to tell his friends to find seats first while he stood there waiting. No, he hadn't meant to wait for Mhok. There were just things that needed to be discussed in person. A phone call would have been inconvenient. After a while, Mhok finally came down. His thin frame stood half a head shorter than Rome's. He was soaked, his clothes plastered to his body, his black hair looking even darker from the water. His cheeks were red, but his lips were pale, nearly blue. He was obviously freezing. Seeing this, Rome felt his ears begin to buzz. An inexplicable fury surged up from the pit of his stomach. His hands started to tremble. He wanted to grab Mhok, shake his shoulders, and demand to know who had dared to do this to him. But more than that, he was worried about Mhok's safety. "I need you to pull the surveillance footage from the classroom building at noon," Rome said quietly, his voice thick with suppressed rage. "Why do you need the surveillance?" Zach asked, confused. He was even more startled by the dark expression on Rome's face. Mhok was bullied. Rome's voice dropped so low it nearly became a growl. "It was just some stupid thing, throwing water. But I can't stand it." "What? This happened at noon?" "Yes. In the building." Zach nodded, immediately understanding what Rome meant. He pushed up his glasses, turned back to his computer, and his fingers flew across the keyboard. "What's going on?" Vince asked, frowning. He had never heard of such a thing happening at the school, let alone to Mhok, who was Arseni's man. Who would dare touch him? "You're so slow you didn't even know about this?" Zach sighed, unable to suppress his complaint. "You knew?" "Of course I knew. Those girls tell me things all the time." Zach leaned back in his chair, looking perfectly relaxed. They call themselves white purists. They believe the Caucasian race is the supreme race, nobler than all others. Every other race is just low-class slaves to them. What the hell is that? Vince swore. He had heard whispers about such things, but since he had never paid them much attention, he didn't know the details. Would they really go this far? Those people will do anything because they believe they're inherently superior. Zach shrugged, his face full of disgust and contempt. If someone of another race enters what they see as their territory or outshines them in any way, they feel personally offended. They can't accept a white person falling behind, so they'll use any means necessary to tear that person down. So Mhok wasn't the first victim? Rome asked, his voice growing darker. This has been going on for a long time. Zach picked up his phone, scrolled for a moment, then handed it to Rome. On the screen was a school forum page, the kind of place where students posted and debated. Normally, none of them ever bothered to look at it. But the most popular posts weren't news at all. They were filled with attacks, mockery, and insults. The language was vicious beyond belief. Are these people insane? They are insane. Zach shrugged. The teachers think it's just stupid pranks. The victims definitely don't think it's funny. Got it. Zach's voice snapped everyone's attention to the computer screen. Though the image was slightly blurry, the events were clear. They watched Mhok walk out of the classroom, reach the stairwell, then get stopped by a group of girls. A moment later, a bucket of water was thrown over him. Rome ground his teeth, his eyes terrifyingly dark. Watching it with his own eyes, his fury was nearly beyond control. That girl looks familiar. Zach crossed his arms and tapped his chin. Isn't that Becky? The one who confessed to you on Valentine's Day last year. Who? I don't remember. Rome's voice was barely a whisper. His eyes held no trace of recognition. But now I want to know her. Very much. Zach shook his head, feeling a sliver of sympathy for the girl. A wolf like Rome was never easy to tame. He couldn't understand why anyone would go out of their way to provoke him. Find all their information, Rome said quietly. Then he went back to scrolling through his friend's phone. He skimmed the forum posts rapidly. Whenever he found any comment attacking Asian students, he clicked in and read it thoroughly. His fingers began tapping at the keyboard, as if venting his rage through the screen. She's still a girl. Take it easy. Don't hit her, Vince advised. When he saw his friend ignore him completely, he frowned. He looked at Zach, then turned back to Rome. What are you going to do? I won't hurt them. Mhok made me promise. Rome answered, his voice thick with reluctance, his fingers never stopping on the phone. Then what are you doing? I'm cursing them out. Rome frowned. Mhok told me not to hit them, so I'm cursing them out instead. The three friends exchanged glances, silently registering their surprise. Rome, whose temper ran hotter than anyone's and who would throw punches at the slightest provocation, had actually held himself back because of Mhok's words. Zach found it genuinely funny. Though he kept his mouth still, his eyes glinted with laughter. Vince remained baffled and kept grumbling complaints. Zach sighed and pulled Vince aside to keep him out of the blast zone of Rome's anger. So what are you going to do with that information? Zach asked, pointing at his computer screen, where streams of data continued to scroll. Didn't your man tell you not to handle this personally? I'll send the information to Pyan. Mhok said not to do it myself, so I'll let Pyan take care of it. Rome paused, narrowing his eyes as if a new thought was forming. No, this might actually be good bait. You mean the information brokers? Zach raised his eyebrows and nodded in agreement. What are you two talking about? What bait? What use could that pile of garbage information possibly have? Vince looked between them, utterly lost. Zach could only sigh, sling an arm around Vince's shoulders, and steer him away to spare him from Rome's simmering wrath. Here's what's happening. Mhok woke early the next morning. Though it was early, it was still late compared to his usual waking time. His body no longer felt so cold. His limbs were a little stiff, but at least he had no fever. He sat up, feeling slightly dizzy, and blinked. When he turned his head toward the bedside, the sight that greeted him only added to his confusion. A tall boy sat in the chair beside his bed, arms folded across his chest, head tilted to one side, eyes closed. He was clearly not sleeping comfortably. A frown creased his face. Mhok looked at him quietly, a strange feeling stirring in his chest. His fingers pressed unconsciously against his ribs. His heartbeat seemed slightly out of rhythm. It was strange, but he didn't hate the feeling. He sat for a while, hugging his knees, the corners of his mouth lifted. A soft light flickered in his eyes. This was the first time he had ever woken up with someone beside him. It made the world feel less empty and lonely. Mhok sat quietly, gazing at Rome with tenderness, carefully studying his face. Rome was good-looking. Though he was a little impulsive and quick to complain, those traits only made him more striking. He always held his shoulders back with confidence. His tall frame made others feel secure, as if he would always protect them. Without realizing it, Mhok had been drawn in by that presence. His eyes always seemed to linger on Rome without his permission. He reached out a hand, his fingertips nearly brushing Rome's face. But he stopped himself. He couldn't get too close. Mhok pressed his lips together and sighed softly, struggling to quiet the turmoil inside. Yet his eyes remained fixed on Rome, unable to move away. After a while, Rome stirred. His frown deepened, then his eyes opened. He looked toward the bed first, and found Mhok already up, the bed neatly made. Panic flickered through his gaze as he scanned the room. Mhok, standing behind him, couldn't hold back a small laugh. Then he composed himself and said, "Aren't you going to take a shower?" Rome spun around and shot to his feet. He crossed the distance in a few quick strides, reaching out to press his hand against Mhok's forehead. Only after confirming there was no fever did he let out a breath of relief. "Why didn't you call me? What if you had fainted?" Rome complained, frowning. "And why do you need a shower right now? What if you catch a fever?" Mhok regarded him calmly, feeling a little helpless. It was only now he realized just how much Rome loved to fuss. "It's time for class." Mhok straightened his jacket, opened the door, and stepped out. "Master Rome, you should hurry too, or you'll be late." With that, Mhok closed the door, ignoring Rome's protests from inside. He pressed his lips together and fought back a smile, but a shadow of melancholy crossed his eyes. He decided it was time to put some distance between himself and Rome. This kind of sweet warmth would one day become impossible to escape. Mhok shook his head, casting off the useless thoughts, and walked straight to the classroom. Today he was later than usual. His body still felt heavy, and he had no appetite, so he went directly to class. He entered through the back door and made his way silently to his seat. Before he could even say hello, a familiar girl approached. Mhok looked up. Becky stood before him. Blonde hair, blue eyes, red cheeks. Her hands were clasped together, and she looked deeply nervous. "I'm sorry about yesterday." Becky stammered, her voice full of apology and embarrassment. Mhok paused, a little surprised. But it was good that the matter could be resolved this way. He smiled faintly, his eyes gentle, even as he heard someone mutter, pretending, under their breath nearby. "It's all right. Don't take it to heart. Everyone makes mistakes. Let's just leave it in the past." Mhok's voice was soft, so gentle it made the heart skip. Becky blushed even deeper, nodded hastily, and hurried back to her seat. "What was that just now?" Mhok turned and asked Lafu, who was leaning back in his chair, barely containing his laughter. He waited until Mhok's patience visibly thinned. Then Lafu picked up his phone and opened the school forum. "Look at this post. Becky and the others were probably planning to make a video to humiliate you." Lafu tapped on a clip. In the video, Mhok was drenched with water, then exchanged a few words with Rome. The distance made the audio unclear. "You looked incredibly handsome when you shook your hair back," Lafu teased. "That single bucket of water earned you a screaming fan club of girls. And you picked up a dad along the way." Mhok stared at Lafu's phone for several seconds, then asked calmly, "What dad?" "Look at this." Lafu swiped the screen and opened another post. Post title: "I'm sick of these Asians. They stink. I don't know why we even let them in." Comment 1: "Exactly. This is our school for Europeans. Why should we have to deal with these third-world people?" Comment 2: "They're using the tax money we pay." Comment 20: "They should all go back where they came from." Reply to comment 20: "If you're so powerful, why don't you just go back yourself?" Mhok stared, stunned, as a mysterious reply suddenly appeared amid a flood of identical comments. Sharp, provocative, and fearless. Comment 30: "Are you protecting these yellow monkeys? What are you, their father?" Reply to comment 30: "So what if I am? I'm your father too. Don't forget that." Comment 31: "What? You want to play the hero? Trying to be a good guy?" Reply to comment 31: "This is called being the male lead. Handsome and kind. Obviously I have to take that role." Comment 32: "Don't get too cocky. If you've got the guts, show your face. I'll beat you down on the spot." Reply to comment 32: "Call me dad." Actually, forget it. I don't want a son as stupid as you. The comments on the post continued endlessly, irritating, yet strangely funny. What had started as a coordinated attack on Asian students had suddenly veered into a verbal war with this self-proclaimed dad. Mhok was still bewildered when another classmate walked over. Lucio, the Italian Mafia heir, approached with a smile, though his eyes were stern. "You're a celebrity now?" Lucio said. After confirming Mhok was unharmed, his tone relaxed. "I told you to let me help. We're in the same class, at least. Vladio is happy to lend a hand." "That won't be necessary." The cold voice didn't come from Mhok. He turned toward the classroom door and saw Rome walking in, his face dark. "Master Rome, what brings you here?" Mhok asked. "You didn't eat breakfast. I brought it for you." Rome's answer was short, his voice softening a little. But when he turned toward Lucio, his eyes and tone turned fierce again. "As for you, go back to your seat. Arseni takes care of his own." Chapter 17. Mhok paused for a moment, blinking, a look of mild surprise crossing his face. He had always been the one rushing to bring breakfast to his master because his master couldn't drag himself out of bed. He hadn't expected that today it would be Rome coming to his classroom, carrying a bag of food, looking for him. "You really do take good care of him," Lucio said, his lips curving with a trace of irony. "Even the master has to deliver breakfast personally." "Of course I take care of my people. What's so strange about that?" Rome paused, and his eyes swept slowly across the classroom, heavy with command. His sharp, gray gaze passed over every face, finally stopping deliberately on Becky and her group. "And I want to make something clear. Mhok is Arseni's man. He's under my protection. If anyone has a problem with that, come to me directly. I'll take full responsibility." The blonde girl flinched and quickly dropped her head, avoiding Rome's stare. The other students sat frozen, not daring to look at one another. They hadn't directly attacked the Asian students, but they had whispered behind their backs. Though they lacked the vicious prejudice of the extreme white supremacists, a quiet sense of distance still kept them sharply divided from the Asian students. Human minds, built for social survival, instinctively judge whether the person before them belongs to the same group, then choose the appropriate way to interact. These Asian students didn't look like our own people at all. Discomfort in dealing with them was only natural. Mhok looked up, a little surprised. He remembered that Rome was the son of a gangster, but because Rome usually acted so simply and directly and always revolved around him, he had almost forgotten this side of him. It had been a while since he'd seen such a terrifying edge from Rome. It honestly felt a bit strange. Though he found Rome a little frightening in that moment, the corner of Mhok's mouth lifted briefly before he composed himself. "Are you some kind of guard dog? Why are you so territorial?" Lucio sneered, a note of disdain escaping his nose. He glanced at Mhok. Though his face stayed calm, Mhok thought he caught a hint of teasing in those eyes. "Put a collar and leash on him properly, so he doesn't go around biting everyone." "Master Lucio, that's going a bit far." Mhok stood, deciding to cut off the exchange between the two gangsters before the words grew any sharper. "I think we should stop here. Master Lucio, please return to your seat." He looked up at Lucio, a trace of appeal in his eyes, but the Italian gangster was clearly enjoying himself and had no desire to stop. "What's the matter? I barely said anything, and you're already chasing me off?" "Mhok, you're so heartless." Lucio spoke with a smile. Instead of retreating, he took a step forward, forcing Mhok to lift a hand to block him. But just as Mhok's palm met Lucio's chest, Rome, who had been standing silently behind him, suddenly reached out, seized Mhok's wrist, and pulled him back against his chest, as if locking him inside his arms. "I believe I warned you to stay away from him." Rome's voice came from above Mhok's head, deep and full of authority, edged with threat, enough to make anyone shudder. Mhok blinked, fighting to steady himself, and quickly spoke to mediate before the situation could escalate further. "It's nearly time for class. Master Rome, you should head back to your own classroom. Thank you for the breakfast." Mhok turned and took the paper bag from Rome's hands, holding it against his chest, then looked at Lucio. "Master Lucio, let's stop here. I'm asking you. Of course. I always listen to you." The Italian gangster smiled and made a show of winking. "As for that invitation I mentioned before, you're welcome to come find me anytime." After dropping that bomb, Lucio turned and walked back to his seat, leaving Mhok to exhale in relief. He pinched the bridge of his nose and rubbed his temples, acutely aware that the atmosphere behind him was still wound tight and ready to snap. He pressed his lips together, drew a deep breath, and gathered the courage to turn and face Rome. Rome's face was composed, but the storm in his flickering eyes betrayed how fierce his inner emotions truly were. Compared to his usual impatient demeanor, Rome seemed almost approachable in this moment. Mhok laid a slender hand gently on Rome's solid arm and gave him a slight nudge, whispering, "Master Rome, please go to your classroom first. I'll contact you after class." Rome frowned, his expression hardening in an instant. But he only moved the corner of his mouth a fraction, a faint, fleeting smile, then turned and left the room without another word. Lafu, who had been sitting silent in the corner for a long while, suddenly let out a soft laugh. He glanced sideways at Mhok, a teasing smile in place. Being too charming can be exhausting. Mhok turned his head and met his friend's eyes. Something flickered across his face, but he recovered a moment later, only the corner of his mouth still lifted. "Yeah, it really is." When the bell rang, Mhok quickly packed his bag. He glanced at his friend beside him and slowed his movements. "Do you have anything this afternoon?" "No, I'll probably just go to the library." Lafa shrugged, then raised an eyebrow. "Don't you have a date with Master Rome?" "No, being with him is boring." Mhok's mouth curved slightly. He slung his bag over his shoulder and gestured for the scholarship student to go ahead. As he walked, he reached into his bag, pulled out his phone, quickly typed a short message, and slipped it back. His movements were smooth and natural. They made their way to the library, where Lafu again chose a seat in the corner, a low bookshelf behind him, a decorative tree on the other side. Mhok sat down, crossed his legs, folded his hands over his knee, and leaned back at his leisure. His dark eyes fixed on his friend, staring intently. Lafu simply pulled out a book and began reading, though he frowned and shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsettled by the staring. After a moment, Lafu sighed, closed the book, set it on his lap, and turned to Mhok with an expression close to surrender. "What do you want?" "I just have something to ask you," Mhok said calmly, raising a hand to show it truly was only a small matter. "I want to know who bought your information." Lafu frowned, his face full of confusion, a wry smile touching his lips, as if he had just heard an absurd joke. "I don't understand what you're talking about." "Don't pretend, Lafu. We're friends. I'm asking you directly." Mhok smiled slightly, a hint of warmth in his tone, but the atmosphere was no longer friendly. It was thick with tension, dense enough to choke on. If Rome's presence was majestic, like a master no one dared look at directly, then Mhok's was an icy stillness, as if an invisible knife were pressed against the throat. "I honestly don't understand what you're talking about," Lafa said evenly, his expression sobering as he registered the weight in the air. Mhok's smile widened, but it only made him look more frightening, like the grin of death itself. His sharp eyes were dark and flat. "A scholarship student, and you had enough money to buy the latest iPhone?" This time, Lafa fell silent. His lips pressed tightly together. He was speechless. Mhok watched him, his smile growing even brighter, then spoke in a calm, conversational tone, as if discussing the weather. "You know too much. From the very first day I arrived, even though I wasn't wearing the Arseni crest, you knew I belonged to Arseni. Even Lucio took nearly a week to figure it out." Mhok shook his head slightly, almost offhandedly. "You told me you have ways to protect yourself. If you were targeted because of racial prejudice or hatred toward Asians, what could a powerless scholarship student like you possibly use to defend himself, besides information?" Lafa's expression had shifted. He was calmer now, even a little grim, stripped of his usual ease and cheer. Mhok lowered his head briefly, and a strange hollow feeling opened in his chest. But when he looked up again, his face was more composed than before. "That information broker has to be you, Lafu." Lafu was silent for a long moment. Then the corner of his mouth lifted into a smile that held no warmth. His eyes were cold and steady. "In a world full of savage beasts, small people like us can get crushed underfoot without even realizing it." Lafu's voice was cold, stripped of a friend's warmth. "People like you, with powerful backers, will never understand." "I do understand. This world makes us so small we can barely breathe, as if we'd die from the slightest squeeze." Mhok lowered his head a little, a faint smile on his lips, his meaning hard to read. It's a bit of a shame, but I understand. His past had never been kind to him. It had never granted him a single moment of ease. Are you going to accuse me of betraying you? Lafu smiled sarcastically, folding his hands loosely across his chest, looking entirely unconcerned. I didn't betray anyone. I have Arseni's information, but I also have information on others. It's just business. No, you're protecting yourself. I respect what you're doing. I'm not here to corner you or hurt you. I'm here to buy information. Mhok rested his chin on his hand and leaned forward slightly. What do you want? I want to know who bought your information. Mhok returned to the original question, his hands still folded, his posture calm, exerting no pressure. Lafa sighed and looked out the window, as if weighing his options. At last, he answered, I wasn't the one who sold the information about Arseni's eldest son. Mhok raised an eyebrow but waited patiently. Lafa tapped his chin lightly, as if gathering his thoughts, then explained. The information trading group is a large network. A lot of kids in need join in to help one another, trading news, sharing information, lending a hand whenever necessary. Otherwise, how could I, on my own, keep an eye on everything and track the news of the entire school? The scholarship student shot Mhok a faintly complaining look, as if to say, use your brain. The person who bought and sold your master's information is a senior in the final year, from the same class as the young master. I want to know who it is. Mhok leaned forward a little more, his expression serious. I'll help you make contact and give you an answer within 3 days. But I'll need something in exchange. Lafu explained that they never revealed identities to ensure safety. He had no intention of exposing others' identities to outsiders. I only want the name of the client who bought the information. Is there room to bargain? At minimum, we trade information for information. Understood. I'll have it ready. Thank you. Mhok stretched lazily and stood. In an instant, the suffocating chill vanished, and he was once again the calm, harmless Asian boy. Anyone watching could only laugh inwardly, thinking how perfectly matched the master and his man truly were. Oh, one more thing. As Mhok turned to grab his bag, Lafu called out to him. The scholarship student looked at him directly, his expression more serious than ever before. It was enough to make Mhok's hand pause mid-motion. This isn't persuasion, and it's not self-protection. I just want you to know, I've never sold your information. Not once. Not even a fraction of it. Lafu's voice was firm and steady, his eyes full of sincerity. Mhok blinked, smiled faintly, and slung his bag over his shoulder. He said a short goodbye, then walked out of the library with light steps. The fog that had been hanging over his heart during their conversation seemed to have lifted, just a little. Mhok pushed open the library door. Outside, a tall figure was already waiting, arms crossed. His angular face was set in a frown, his gray eyes downcast and filled, uncharacteristically, with tangled, complicated thoughts. Beyond the tangled thoughts, Mhok caught a glimpse of something else hidden there. Guilt. He tilted his head slightly, surprised that Rome would feel guilty about anything. Rome was the type to solve problems with force, but he always thought twice before acting. Mhok had almost never seen him carry guilt. Rome looked up and saw him approaching. The young man nodded gently and invited him to dinner, saying he would pay. Then he walked on ahead, leaving Mhok to follow behind with his doubts. Chapter 18. Are you hungry? What do you want to eat? Rome turned and asked him for what felt like the 100th time. Mhok was too weary to keep count. Surprised and a little irritated, he could only cross his arms, narrow his eyes, and study Rome with open suspicion. Ever since they had left the library, the young master had seemed strange, as if lost in thought, tangled up with guilt and anxiety. Even by the second day, his condition hadn't improved. It was a rest day morning, and Rome had gotten up early on his own, without needing to be called. After a bit of coaxing, he had pulled Mhok to the small meeting room in the school's central building without any real explanation. Master Rome, what's wrong with you? Mhok asked, trying to keep his tone even, to not let his irritation slip through. Or do you need something from me? You're the young master. You don't need to go out of your way to please me. No. The young gangster blurted the word out, then froze, his frown tightening, as if he were arguing with himself. Mhok simply crossed his arms and waited, looking directly at him, offering no chance to escape the conversation. He had been enduring his master's strange behavior since the day before. His patience was nearly at its limit. What happened? A friend's voice broke the tense atmosphere. Mhok sighed and turned away, letting Rome and his friend continue. Nothing. I'm just looking after my own people. Nothing strange about that. Rome coughed lightly. The sound was low and a little vague, barely audible, but anyone listening could still feel something was off. Yesterday, Rome had treated him to a large meal and been so attentive it raised every suspicion. The next day, his heavy brows were still furrowed, and he kept hovering around Mhok, even blowing off a planned meeting with a friend to forcibly drag him out. How is that not strange? But you brought Mhok here. Does that mean you've confirmed it? Vince asked, raising an eyebrow. Rome simply nodded with such seriousness that Vince could only look around, utterly confused. Confirm what? What were these people planning? Zach shot Rome a warning look, but seeing his friend's grave expression, he seemed to grasp the situation. He clapped Rome on the shoulder in encouragement, then slung an arm around Vince's neck and steered him away. You two probably have things to discuss. We'll go in later. Zach smiled at Mhok, then walked off with their bewildered friend. Mhok folded his arms, crossed his legs, and let his face settle into something close to cold. He had guessed what was going on. Whatever these people were doing was likely connected to Rome's current state. I'm investigating the people who bought information from the information brokers. Rome offered the explanation tersely, not meeting his eyes. Zach is tracking the leads, but there isn't much to go on. You suspected me, didn't you? Mhok cut in. His expression and tone were so calm, they were nearly impossible to read. Rome, sitting across from him, grew even more unsettled, guilt written plainly across his face. I suspected everyone at first. Not just you. Rome hurried to explain, his brow furrowed, thick with anxiety. What happened with Pine is too serious. I couldn't let it go. You did the right thing. Mhok's voice softened, dropping low and gentle, as if to soothe the listener. Rome looked up and caught a strange expression flicker across the Asian boy's face, but it smoothed back to normal almost instantly. The matter concerning Master The is serious. Buying and selling information among students at school might not seem like much, but we need to know exactly what information was bought and be ready to handle whatever comes of it. Mhok stood. He finally understood why Rome had been meeting his friends in a private room. The fewer people who knew about this, the better. But before he could fully rise, Rome shot up and seized his wrist. A chaos of emotions churned through those gray eyes. Yet amid the surging storm, the hesitation and doubt vanished. I won't betray you. Rome spoke slowly and clearly, his tone carrying a weight that would not be forgotten. I know I'm not your ideal partner in this. I know I doubted you, and I know that hurt you. But I can tell you now, I will not betray you. I will never abandon you. The firmness of those words, the sheer seriousness, left Mhok stunned. His eyes widened a fraction. His heart surged, impossible to suppress. He had said himself that he didn't need trust. He had never believed in the word trust, never believed anyone would give it to him. That was why he claimed he didn't need it. He simply didn't want to hope and be disappointed. But who in this world didn't want to earn someone's trust? You shouldn't say that, Master Rome. The situation is still unclear, and I'm not a good person. But you said you wouldn't betray me. Mhok paused, his eyes meeting the others. The words he had spoken before seemed to echo in his ears. Yes, I will not betray you. That's enough. Rome looked down at his hand, still wrapped around Mhok's wrist. He loosened his grip slightly, letting his fingertips trail across the skin until only the lightest touch remained, as if they might separate at any moment, yet were still tethered, each aware of the other's presence. You don't have to be anything more than you are. I'm not a good person either. Rome's voice was low and rough, trembling at the edges with emotion. But can you promise not to betray me? I won't betray you either. Mhok lifted his gaze to him. A faint itch stirred in his chest, like a feather brushing softly through, leaving a strange tremor in its wake. The corners of his mouth lifted, revealing a gentle smile, and his dark eyes caught the light. Who asked such a thing in such a tender voice? Not to betray each other. I said I would not betray you, and I always keep my promises. He lowered his head, feeling the atmosphere shift into something awkward. He pulled his hand back quickly. Master Rome, you need to let go of your guilt toward me. You were right to doubt me. I'm not angry. Rome watched the slender hand slip away, then straightened. Emotions he had never felt before surged through his chest. He had to look away, cough lightly to recover his senses, then suggested they go inside together. Rome sat down and stared blankly at his friends. He hadn't expected things to unfold like this, and he didn't know what to do next. He felt guilty for having doubted Mhok, though he told himself he had done nothing wrong, and Mhok had made it clear he wasn't angry. He still felt miserable. It was a tangled emotion, too complicated to describe. Because of it, he had decided to atone by bringing Mhok here, to let him see what he was doing and show that his doubts were gone. And, unexpectedly, he had been given a chance to speak from the heart. He thought back to what had just happened, pressed his lips together, and felt heat rushing to his face. What had that been? Why had he suddenly found that smile so adorable? Rome buried his face in his hands, screaming silently, with no idea why he felt as flustered and jittery as one of those teenage girls he was always mocking. This inexplicable embarrassment left him utterly helpless. "What's wrong with you, Rome?" Zach came over and sat beside him. Rome just coughed lightly and sat up straight, as if nothing had happened. His friend raised an eyebrow and turned his attention toward the other group, who were deep in discussion. "I didn't expect you to bring him here. But that guy really is impressive." Rome looked over at Mhok, who was seated in front of the computer, talking with Zach about what information to trade. Give too much, and even if the other party was only from a minor family, it might not be worth it. Give too little, and the other side might play games and withhold crucial details. Mhok is Pioness right hand. Of course he's impressive, Rome answered, his tone swelling with pride. He didn't know when it had happened, when he had stopped searching for Mhok's weaknesses and started admiring his abilities more and more. That's him. I wonder what other hidden talents he has. Zach turned and looked at his friend, a teasing smile on his face. You've got it bad. You're completely obsessed with him. Zach spoke jokingly, not really expecting a reaction. But the listener froze, then buried his face in his hands all over again. I'm not obsessed. You're spouting nonsense. Rome mumbled into his palms. Though his face was still hidden, he knew his friends were staring at him. He didn't care. He wouldn't lift his head until he was certain his expression was back to normal, as if nothing had happened at all. And you still claim you feel nothing for him? I don't know what nonsense you're going on about. Mhok and I are both men. There's nothing between us. Rome spoke with conviction, his expression so resolute it was almost convincing, if not for the fact that his ears were still bright red. I just admire him. Mhok is incredible. He's been through so many terrible things and still has a kind heart. I'm proud he belongs to Arseni. Zach had plenty of experience with such things, and he didn't find Rome's explanation convincing in the slightest. He shook his head, feeling a little helpless at his friend's stubbornness. But he didn't tease him any further. Everyone needed to recognize these things for themselves. Rome stopped paying attention to his friends. He felt Zach's imagination was starting to veer into the ridiculous, so he stood and walked toward the others gathered in the center of the room, his expression turning serious. We've got a name. A scholarship student in Class 2, 3rd year. Zach tapped at his keyboard, and a name appeared on the screen. It looks like she lent her phone to Lafu, which is why we picked up Lafu's activity logs when we traced the signal. Rome stared at the screen. The image showed an Asian girl with single eyelids and slightly upturned eyes. The faint smile on her lips made her appear harmless, but her eyes were full of cunning. I'll go talk to her, Mhok said, flipping through the girl's information, his brow furrowed. No, I'll handle the talking, Rome objected immediately. Mhok raised an eyebrow and fixed him with those dark eyes, though there was no friendliness in them now. Master Rome, you want to negotiate? Mhok asked. Beside him, Rome's friend looked deeply unconvinced. A wave of irritation and displeasure washed over Rome. He didn't understand why everyone assumed he couldn't get anything done. Why? Do you think I can't handle a negotiation? If it's a negotiation using force, then I have absolute faith in you, my friend, Vince answered flatly. Zach, seated at the computer, nodded in agreement. Rome opened his mouth, ready to protest that he was being attacked from all sides. But Mhok raised a hand to stop him and spoke first. Master Rome, you're too impatient. Besides, she's a scholarship student and an Asian girl. She's likely to be wary of a powerful figure like you. Using force or status to pressure her won't always work. On the other hand, I'm also Asian, with no power or influence to speak of. She may be more willing to open up to me. Mhok paused, the corner of his mouth curving upward with a strange, cunning glint. Also, it's easier for her to let her guard down around me. Rome narrowed his eyes. He weighed Mhok's words carefully. The reasoning made sense. But his own concerns were just as strong, and they left him hesitating. After staring into those sharp eyes for a long moment, he sighed and nodded reluctantly. If Mhok was this confident, he didn't want to stand in his way. He told himself he was simply following Mhok's wishes. He hadn't backed down just because everyone said he couldn't handle it. Chapter 19. The weather was turning colder. Though it was just past noon, the sun had already begun its descent, far too early for someone from Asia to grow accustomed to. The wind picked up, dragging cold air behind it, making it plain that winter was on its way. He didn't like winter. As far back as he could remember, winter had never brought anything good. Mhok strolled at a leisurely pace, pulling his coat tighter with one hand. The heavy coat was undeniably warm, but it was a full size too large for him. His young master had forced it on him, insisting that since Mhok feared the cold and was too lazy to buy his own, he should just take it without complaint. He pushed open a glass door, and the bell above it rang clearly. His eyes swept quickly around the shop. Then he walked straight to a table by the window and sat down. Hedges on both sides screened the spot into a private corner. "Hello, Senior." Mhok's greeting was soft, a businesslike smile on his face. He looked gentle and polite, a complete departure from his usual serious demeanor. The girl seated across from him raised her eyebrows in mild surprise, but quickly recovered, a bright smile curving her lips and her eyes lifting. "Oh my God. Loftwood didn't mention the boy he was introducing was this handsome." She giggled, though her eyes were sharp with vigilance. "But, you said you were interested in me. You weren't joking, were you?" "Of course not. How could I not be interested when my senior is this cute?" He chuckled, and both of them held their polite smiles in place. "You're such a sweet talker. What do you really want from me?" The girl pretended to giggle, and he smiled even more brightly. He crossed his hands under his chin and leaned forward slightly, serious, but not overbearing. "I want to know who your ex-boyfriend is." He tapped the back of his hand with his fingertips in a slow rhythm, the faint smile still on his face. "I'd like to get some information, to see if I can match up to him. Can you help me?" Yulan raised an eyebrow. Her businesslike smile took on a hint of indulgence. She leaned back in her chair, visibly more relaxed. "As a member of the Arseni family, you need to worry about an ex-boyfriend?" She shook her head. "This sister doesn't like to discuss old boyfriends in front of a new one." "Don't be like that. I'm only a low-level employee of the Arseni family." He chuckled. "I won't ask for nothing. I have something to trade." "Is your trade offer Arseni family business?" "If the terms aren't right, this sister will take a loss." Yulan raised an eyebrow, a flash of interest crossing her eyes. Seeing this, Mhok smiled lightly, the picture of calm. He had anticipated this and had come prepared. "I really am just a minor employee." He lowered his head, his voice dropping, a trace of sadness coloring his smile. "I've been bullied twice now. My senior must know that already. What can someone like me really do?" The girl paused. Asians being bullied and excluded was nothing new. She had experienced it herself. Because of that, her eyes softened without her willing it. "So, what's your trade?" Yulan made a show of resting her chin on her hand, a note of tenderness slipping into her voice. Mhok smiled slightly, catching the shift. Though she still looked casual, her guard was no longer as high. "I know some things about that person." Mhok struck while the iron was hot, his slender fingers resting lightly on his knees, his eyes carrying a hint of sadness. "Honestly, I'd originally wanted to find something to protect myself in case he came after me again. But I can give this information to my senior instead." Yulan let out a long sigh. Half her heart was filled with sympathy, and the other half couldn't help drifting to thoughts of this boy's master. Rome was known for his foul temper, his impulsiveness, and his love of solving problems with his fists. His young master probably didn't care much for having such a frail-looking Asian boy under his command. After silently grumbling to herself, Yulan nodded in resignation. "Well, as a senior, it's my duty to look after my junior." She leaned forward a little. "Go on then. Tell me the information you have." Mhok pushed open the door of a small conference room tucked into a corner of the building with practiced ease. Rome's team had been using this room as a secret meeting place for some time now, and he had been steadily pulled into their circle. He walked in, his business smile already gone, his usual calm expression back in place. He crossed briskly to the computer, typed in a name, stepped back, and exchanged glances with the others. "We have a name. When Mhok saw everyone's stunned expressions, he paused, his thin eyebrows lifting. His report shifted into a question. What's wrong? Why is everyone looking at me like that? Your acting is insane. Vince was the first to exclaim, his eyes wide, his face the picture of shock. Where's that poor bullied boy you were playing? Did you eat him? Thank you for the compliment. Mhok dipped his head slightly, a teasing smile on his lips. But when his gaze shifted to his master, surprise flickered through him. Why did his master look so dark and unhappy? He tilted his head in confusion. Zach, standing beside him, just smiled softly and shook his head, a trace of resignation in his expression. Master Rome, are you angry with me? Mhok asked, frowning a little, mentally reviewing whether he had done anything wrong. Did I make a mistake? No, you did perfectly. Rome answered, arms crossed, his tone stiff. He wouldn't even meet Mhok's eyes. But you smiled too much, talked too much, and you're far too good at pretending. Mhok let out a soft, incredulous breath, feeling this conversation had slipped beyond his understanding. Was this about what he had said back at the restaurant? He tried to think it through, his brow furrowing deeper. He wondered if he should apologize. But Rome had already risen and walked toward the computer, leaving Zach to let out a quiet laugh. He's just crazy. Don't mind him. Zach waved a hand, signaling Mhok not to take it to heart, then walked toward the computer himself. Mhok could only sigh and return to the unfinished discussion. Bodanai is the one who bought the information. Mhok pointed to the photo on the screen. He's Vladio's man. You're saying this was Vladio's scheme? It's possible, but I don't think so. Mhok shook his head, tapping his chin with his fingertips in a slow rhythm. The Vladio family is a major Italian mafia power. They wouldn't provoke the Arseni family without real necessity. This deal makes no sense for them. Besides, buying information this openly is far too blatant. A true confidant wouldn't be stupid enough to handle a purchase like this. Unless they wanted us to find out who bought it. Zach's words dropped the room into silence. If they really wanted them to know, was this another trap? Wouldn't it be simpler to just grab him and interrogate him? Rome cut in suddenly, looking even more irritated than before. Vince nodded rapidly in agreement. Mhok rolled his eyes, a note of helplessness in his voice. If we did that, wouldn't it look like we struck first without cause? But I think asking directly might actually work. Zach, who had been silent throughout, suddenly spoke up, drawing everyone's attention. He gave his glasses a small nudge and turned toward the only Asian boy in the room. Vladio has taken an interest in you, hasn't he? So just go ask him directly. With your conversational skills, handling that guy shouldn't be a problem. Absolutely not. Mhok turned sharply toward the person who had shouted the objection. Rome froze for a moment, then coughed dryly, seeming to realize his reaction had been a bit extreme. It's too risky, too dangerous. It's hardly that dramatic. I think I can handle it. Mhok crossed his arms, thinking back over his conversations with the Italian gangster. He was annoying, yes, but he was friendly and had shown no malicious intent. But doesn't he want you? Rome insisted, his face darkening further. What if he does something insane, like trying to take you away? Master Lucio only wants to cooperate, Mhok countered calmly, beginning to wonder exactly what the other was imagining. And, in case you've forgotten, I'm also a member of the estate's security team. It's the same thing. What if he tricks you into leaving? I have already stated I will not betray the Arseni family. No matter how Master Lucio tries to tempt me, I will not go. Anything can happen. You shouldn't take risks alone. Mhok fell silent for a moment, his calm expression settling into something more serious. Are you suggesting I might break my word? That's not what I meant. Rome's tone softened. He seemed to want to explain, but Mhok simply raised a hand to stop him. He knew that continuing like this would only spiral into an endless argument, and he had no desire to see things turn into a pointless fight. More than that, he truly could not understand what was going on in Rome's mind. Enough. We can discuss this with Master Thee later. Aren't we going home tomorrow? This matter is directly connected to Master Thee anyway. Mhok turned to the others and dipped his head in gratitude. Thank you all very much for your help. I'm sorry for the trouble. I will be sure to pass on your kindness to Master Thee. Mhok finished speaking, bowed his head once more, then turned and left without another word to anyone. Rome watched his retreating back, his expression tangled, his brow furrowed, his clasped hands tightening. He truly did not like the feeling of being ignored by someone weaker than himself. It looks like he's genuinely angry. Zach laid a hand on his shoulder, a teasing note in his voice, though his eyes still glinted with something unreadable. Rome shot him a glance, not understanding why his friend always enjoyed playing these games. What right does he have to be angry with me? Rome muttered, dissatisfaction still thick in his tone, though inwardly, he was already starting to waver. Everyone has the right to be angry. Whether you choose to make it right or not is your business. Zach gave his shoulder 2 more pats, looking both amused and sympathetic. Hurry up and do what you need to do. Once someone like Mhok makes up his mind, it's not easy to change. What are you talking about? Why would I need to make anything right? Ridiculous. Rome grumbled, took a dissatisfied sip of his drink, then turned to glare at the computer screen. But he sat there for less than 3 minutes before his restless body shot up. He muttered something about being tired and strode out of the room. Zach just smiled softly and said nothing more, silently hoping his friend would come to understand his own feelings sooner rather than later. Though, honestly, watching him figure it out later might be just as entertaining. Chapter 20. Rome pushed the door open carefully. He didn't actually need to be so polite. He was, after all, one of the owners of this room and the master. But when the door swung inward and he found all the lights turned off, he immediately slowed every movement. The tall figure closed the door gently, then approached the bed. The Asian boy lay there, curled under a thick blanket, only the bridge of his nose and his slightly pale cheeks exposed. Rome pulled a chair over and sat down softly, his eyes settling on the other in the quiet. His lips pressed together, and his mind drifted back through everything that had happened. From the first moment they met, he had held no good impression of the boy. The Asian kid was nearly a head shorter than him, yet he always wore that cold, unwelcoming expression. Those dark eyes had looked straight at him, empty of emotion or fear. Rome had felt looked down upon, and it had made him deeply unhappy. He had decided to find the other's weakness, to see if he could force a different expression onto that face. But who could have guessed that after all that watching, he would grow more and more addicted to secretly observing the other's every look. Mhok was not expressionless all the time. He simply rarely let it show. Beneath that cold surface, Rome had glimpsed many feelings. The corners of his mouth lifting without warning, the flicker in his eyes when he held back a smile, the slight press of his lips when he was irritated, and those dark eyes staring straight at him every time Rome annoyed him. Those eyes, always fixed on him directly, were full of sincerity and frankness. No trace of fear, no attempt to evade. Mhok loved food with strong flavors, but he hated winter more than anyone. This cold-fearing Asian boy always curled into his coat, because it cost nothing extra. Though he said trust wasn't necessary, every time Rome showed trust in him, those calm eyes would sparkle. From initial observation, to gradual fondness, to deep fixation, he was obsessed with everything about Mhok. As he had once told him, "You don't need to be better than you are. You're already more than enough." Rome touched the other's cheek lightly with his fingertips, trying to sort through his own feelings. But he was unfamiliar with this kind of emotion. He didn't know how to define it. Mhok was like a dear friend he treasured. But whenever he saw him smiling at others like that, or discovered how many people wanted to get close to him, irritation began to churn. For anyone who understood how remarkable Mhok was, having him to himself was already more than enough. Yet alongside that irritable mood, his heart was also full of worry. Would Mhok be in danger? Would something terrible happen? As much as he hated to admit it, he was truly afraid. "I'm just worried about you," Rome murmured, so low it was nearly a whisper to himself. "You never look after yourself. Your eyes are always fixed forward, only thinking about finishing the task." He drew his fingertips away from the other's cheek. He had never felt this kind of worry for anyone outside his family. "You're my family now. Can you please take just a little more care of yourself? Don't let anything happen to you." The Arseni family were gangsters. They had suffered accidents before and lost the ones they loved. And every time, the real pain fell on those left behind. His heart dropped at the thought that this Asian boy might one day disappear. He sat there a while longer, watching the sleeping face until his restless heart grew still. Then he stood, whispered, "Sleep well," and turned toward the bathroom to wash up and prepare for bed. It wasn't until the door clicked shut and the whole room fell into silence that the figure beneath the blanket slowly opened his eyes. His dark gaze was bright and full of spirit, without the faintest trace of sleepiness. His lips were pressed tight, but the corners of his mouth lifted anyway, revealing a brilliant smile. His cheeks burned. He quickly buried his face in the pillow, hoping this strange, overwhelming feeling would subside. The room was not large, and it was so silent you could hear a pin drop. Even if the other person's voice had been as soft as a breath, the one lying so close had heard every word clearly. Mhok stretched out, closed his eyes, and settled into a peaceful sleep, though he could still hear his own heartbeat, heavier than usual. Tonight, he should be able to have a good dream. Even though it was a weekend morning, Mhok, who had originally planned to return to the Arseni manor, still rose early. He exercised first, then came back to the room to shower as always. Once he was ready, he went to wake the young master still curled in bed. The young master looked sleepy and drenched in sweat, enough to make anyone wonder if he was ill. But Rome was always strong and never looked like someone who got sick. Mhok could only chalk it up to Rome being an over-energetic oddity who still sweated buckets even with winter closing in. "Don't forget to eat breakfast," Rome said from inside his blanket, his gray eyes looking straight at him, carrying stubbornness and a trace of worry. But his tone had softened. "You have to eat breakfast or you'll get sick. Bring something back for me too, while you're at it." Mhok was used to fetching breakfast for the other every day, so he said nothing. He just nodded, left the room, and headed for the cafeteria. In truth, he had once suspected this was Rome's scheme. Once before, he had skipped breakfast because he was in a rush to review for an exam. Rome had been very displeased when he found out. Ever since, the task of bringing breakfast had become a daily ritual, as if to force him to eat every single morning. He selected 2 simple breakfasts, packed them into a brown paper bag, and carried them back. When he returned, Rome had already put himself together. They went downstairs together and climbed into the car the butler had prepared to take them back to the manor. Mhok touched his forehead lightly. Aside from personal reasons, he held no fond memories of winter. As an Asian who had lived in a tropical climate all year round, he was used to heat but always struggled to adjust to the cold. Every change of season, he fell sick easily, as if his body couldn't bear the shift. Though, oddly, once winter fully arrived, he rarely got sick at all. When he woke that morning, his nose was blocked, his body cycling between hot and cold. Something was clearly wrong, but he had taken care of himself since childhood. A minor illness like this was an annual norm, so he said nothing. Mhok was searching for his usual medicine when he suddenly remembered he had left it in his room. He had planned to take a pill the night before as a precaution. The weather was growing colder, after all. But too many things had demanded his attention, and he'd had to go to bed early. This morning, he had been busy preparing to return to the manor. The medicine was still on his bedside table. He rubbed his temples. The fever was becoming more obvious. Even slight movements made his head spin. But the moment Rome turned around, Mhok dropped his hands instantly and walked over as if nothing were wrong. "Are you all right?" Rome asked quietly, his gray eyes carefully scanning the figure shorter than him, searching for any crack. Mhok just smiled, shook his head, and motioned for him to keep going. Not long after, they arrived at the Arseni manor. The master and the lady were already waiting. After a brief greeting, Mhok nodded to Rome and went to discuss recent affairs with the master. Their conversation stretched on until the sky began to darken. The matter with the Teo family wasn't difficult, but it still took time to handle. If it could be mediated smoothly, that would be the best outcome. He thought he could rest early tonight and let his body recover. He hadn't expected that the moment he started down the stairs, dizziness would hit him so hard he had to clutch the wall. "Hey, you okay, little guy?" Just as he was about to pitch headfirst into the stair railing, a large hand caught his arm in time. Mhok steadied himself, looked up, and found a familiar face. He let out a breath of relief. "Paloff," he said, slowly straightening, exhaling long. Alof released his grip gradually. "Are you all right? Your face is red." The bodyguard, who hadn't seen him in a long while, pressed a hand to Mhok's cheek. "Are you running a fever? Your temperature's so high. Have you taken anything?" "Not yet." Mhok gathered his senses and turned. "Paloff, can you help me get some medicine? I don't think I can get to the medicine box on my own." "Who's going to let you go anywhere alone?" Alof said, resigned. "Let me get you back to your room first. If you faint on the way, it'll be a real problem." Mhok blinked. He had never been fussed over like this before. It struck him, suddenly, that this must be what it felt like to be nagged by a father. In the end, he just smiled and let the other help him back toward his room. Alof pushed open the familiar door. But before he could guide Mhok inside, his arm was gently pulled away. Mhok, unsteady on his feet, nearly collided with Alof's chest. He registered the other's quickened breathing, the sudden jump of his heartbeat. "What are you doing?" The deep, commanding voice made Alof release him instantly and step back. The bodyguard lowered his head. Mhok knew immediately who had arrived. He looked up and saw Rome standing there, his tall frame blocking Mhok's much shorter one. Rome's forehead was slick with sweat, his breathing rushed. He had clearly run the whole way. His brows were furrowed, his face dark, brimming with displeasure and what looked like genuine anger. Mhok had never seen Rome this furious. "Mhok isn't feeling well. He seems to have a fever. I was just about to get him back to his room and fetch some medicine." Alof reported with strict seriousness, clearly not understanding why his master was so enraged. Rome's face stayed dark, but the look in his eyes eased slightly. He turned and studied Mhok carefully. Feeling the heat radiating from Mhok's arm, Rome released his grip at once and gently supported him instead. "Then go get the medicine. And bring water. I'll look after him." Rome nodded, motioning Alof away. Though Alof didn't fully grasp the situation, he quickly lowered his head and left, leaving the young master and Mhok alone. Rome waited until the other was gone, then rested his hand gently on Mhok's back to steady him. Mhok was lightheaded, but once he felt that familiar warmth, he seemed to relax. Without meaning to, he let his head rest against Rome's chest. "Why did you suddenly get sick?" Rome asked softly, his tone far gentler than before, though his brows and eyes still held displeasure. "Maybe it's the winter. I always feel awful in this kind of weather," Mhok answered, sounding not particularly concerned with himself. "Then why did you let someone else bring you back to your room?" "Palov happened to run into me. He offered to help. He was worried I couldn't make it back on my own." Mhok still didn't understand why he was answering these questions while feverish and dizzy. Besides, his room is right next door. It was on his way. "Then we'll change rooms later. Save the trouble." Mhok glanced at his master's expression. Though he didn't fully understand, he said nothing in the end. He simply laid down on the bed. "Thank you, Master Rome. You should go and rest too. You should rest properly. Don't worry about whether I'm resting or not." Mhok was silent for a moment. Still, he obediently slipped beneath the quilt and watched his master bustle around the room, turning on the heater, bringing extra blankets, and piling them on top of him. The warmth blanketed not only his body but seeped all the way into his heart. Slow, gentle, yet impossibly warm. "I'm sorry to trouble you. Don't think about that. Go to sleep." Rome came closer, drew the blanket up to Mhok's chin, and tucked it in neatly. "Let me worry about you here."